Your mics are on, and I'll call this meeting to order of the Policy Advisory Committee for January, and I'll call roll. Ed Imsand. Ed, can you answer? I know you're on the phone.
Is that on the phone?
Yes, it's on. So Ed's here.
Oh.
David Janis, I'm here. Renee Westelusk.
Here.
I hope you get better with that cough.
Okay, it's just a temporary thing. I got allergies, so.
Understand. West Katzenstein.
He's coming in the door.
We just got to hear from afar. Lyle Fisher.
Here.
Judy Decker. Judy notified me before the meeting that she was ill and she would try to call in. She may or may not get in and join Renee and Ed on the phone lines. Camille Anderson.
Here.
Tim Carroll. Regina Troglin.
Present.
Don Zadiba.
Here.
Tom Bukowskis, welcome back.
Here.
So that here you heard was from Tom Bukowskis. Welcome back from a extended field assignment, field manager down in Arcata. So he's with us again, and it's back full time. So John Kersey,
present,
and Lorelei Oviatt, absent. Okay, with that, we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll follow after me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
The time lag makes that interesting. As does the dropped papers. Moving on to the next item, we have open public comment for items and matters not on the agenda specifically. And at this time, do we have any members in the audience? Seeing none, we'll go online, and we have none also. So we'll move to number 4, approve the minutes of the November PAC meeting. And before we start that process, I will make a comment that I have forwarded all the corrections and corrected versions and approved minutes prior to this November meeting to April earlier this week, and I have also forwarded all the enclosures and attachments that each of you have submitted to me for beginning with the August meeting, and she's working on getting those up on the website. I will say that I need, for a few of them, I'm missing a couple comments that were not in my email. I spent the Christmas vacation looking through the files, and I know that there are a couple that provided written inputs, but I don't have them in my email, and once those are posted, and I'm able to determine which ones are missing, or once they're posted, and if you determine that you made an input, written input at that meeting, it's only for that meeting, each individual meeting, please forward them to me and we'll get them posted with the minutes. So with that, I'll entertain a motion on approving the November PAC meeting minutes.
So moved. This is Renee Westelusk.
Thank you, Renee.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
David, this is Judy Decker. I phoned in.
Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I hope you're feeling well enough to stay with us for the meeting, but if you're not, we understand.
Well, I'll do my best.
Okay. And with that, I'll do roll call again for the minutes. Start with Ed Imsand.
I'm going to abstain because I didn't have a chance to get through them.
Understand. Dave Janis, I for me. Renee Westelusk.
Aye.
West Katzenstein's not here. Lyle Fisher. I'm sorry, you are here. I apologize.
I'm here physically. Aye.
Lyle Fisher.
Aye.
Judy Decker.
Aye.
Camille Anderson.
Aye.
Tim's not here. Regina.
Aye.
Okay, and with that, we have the minutes are approved, and we'll move on to the next topic. And we've got two topics tonight that we have had before this committee more than once. In the case of the Communication and Engagement Plan, this is the third series in reviewing those, and so we have a lot of previous results and inputs, and we have the current subcommittee report to do. With regards to the communication plan itself, and there was a note in the approval of the GSP. The first recommended or corrective action directed by DWP relates to the communication and engagement plan, especially with regards to the implementation of the GSP. There is some uncertainty about or lack of clarity in what they meant in their one paragraph discussion about the corrective actions that they recommended. But there was, and there will be, the GA is planning at their next meeting to have an agenda item to present the assessment and actions that they would recommend moving forward on assessing the DWP approval and corrections. And at that time, the DWR, Department of Water Resources, is expected to be on the line, and they'll either agree with the interpretation they heard, or there will be a meeting scheduled subsequent to that to clarify the exact actions. In this case, action number one or recommendation number one, and some of the others that require more clarification later. And that's reasonable that you get more clarity around those recommended actions directly with Department of Water Resources. So it is likely, given the timeline, that we will be asked to relook at this communication and engagement plan, or the response to it, the impacts that we may assess from the DWR comments and actions needed from the GA, to take that up again. Probably, most likely, it'll be at our March meeting, because they won't have submitted the written report at that time to DWR, and that wouldn't make our February meeting unless DWR clarifies it to their agreement that we know what to do and what our tasking may be. But it was clear to me in talking to staff, since the groundwater sustainability plan was approved, that we will be heavily involved in at least this one item, and also I think our targeting of key messaging and fact sheets was spot on, because essential elements of communication, which are the words I used in summarizing what our key points would be, or what we were working on, that's exactly the kind of thing they're referencing. In fact, I'm trying to find among my pile of documents here the exact wording. Have you all read the GSP DWR approval?
I have not seen it.
No, I haven't.
Recommendation one.
It's on
I
page
did
40.
read.
It's on page 43, and with regards to that, I'll read it. It's recommended corrective action number one: provide additional information on the required ongoing communications elements required in the GSP regulations, and it references a section of the GSP itself, or the Sigma with regards to the GSP, and describe how those required elements fit into the authority's communication and engagement plan, including how it will continue to allow an open collaborative process with active diverse stakeholder engagement, parent, such as those identified in the communication and engagement plan's notification list. See section 4.14 of that communication and engagement plan, unparent, close parent, during the plan implementation. So we know we will be engaged in that, but there is still value in us identifying those gaps and the key message elements that this subcommittee was working on for the whole committee, and that was the intent of arriving at agreement tonight on what those are. And there may be and therefore we may find out of that future tasking that there are specific changes we want to add to the communication and engagement plan. So with that background, let's start with the subcommittee report recommendations that you should all have in your pile of stuff in front of you. And West Katzenstein chaired that committee, and I'd like him to report out on that.
I'll take a few minutes and go through this. The folks that ended up on the ad hoc C&E subcommittee were those who offered comments at one of the earlier PAC meetings. That was Judy Decker, Lyle Fisher, myself, and Nick Panzer. Nick Panzer recently resigned from the PAC, but most of his inputs are still contained in this document. So basically, we were tasked to do two things. What specific activities should the Groundwater Authority undertake to increase the effectiveness of C&E? So we were trying to get a little bit more focused. And then secondly, should the C&E plan be revised? So those are the two major subject areas we took on. And let me work my way then through both of those. And here are our recommendations. First of all, once again, to the first tasking element, what specific activities should the Groundwater Authority undertake to increase the effectiveness of C&E? And we thought about that, and, there's been a significant effort made over time to push information to the community. There's been mailings by the Domestic Well Owners Association. There's been local news media articles. And, of course, the Groundwater Authority tried to mail something to everybody in the basin. So there's been significant effort to push information, but that's tough in today's world. A few folks get the newspaper. Some folks are on Facebook. There's some watching here tonight. Some attend the Groundwater Authority, but there's no way to really effectively push information. On the other hand, David, you made a point in one of our meetings that a responsibility of citizenship is to go out and find out for yourself. And I call that pulling information, going out and finding the information. And today's world is very well suited to that. You can do a search online. I suppose you can search on Facebook. I'm not active in Facebook. But if you want to go, if you're a good citizen and you're trying to find information, it's there for you. Or it should be there for you. Let me put it that way. And that's particularly important now that everyone in the basin pretty much has gotten a notice they're part of a lawsuit. So I think people are energized now, and we can expect them to be looking, trying to pull information. So one of our first recommendations was that we really need to be sure that the Groundwater Authority is undertaking activities that people will find the information they should go looking for. And also, there's a lot of misinformation being spread out on the internet and other places. And in fact, those folks are very effective at getting their word out. And so the real challenge we saw it is we should assume that most stakeholders are now aware that things are happening and should be looking for information. So you have to imagine you're a newly interested stakeholder. If you start plowing into the information available on the GA website, you're going to see an awful lot of work over a lot of time that's led us to where we are. But you're going to have a hard time finding that introductory summary information that you would like to get started. And maybe then it might encourage you to explore more deeply. So what we wrote here is a newly interested stakeholder can be expected to want overviews on SGMA, overviews on the efforts of the Groundwater Authority, and how all stakeholders are impacted by these efforts. And so, for example, I'm going to want to know how other stakeholders are impacted as well as myself as a domestic well owner. So what we wrote here is the challenge to such a stakeholder, a newly interested stakeholder, is to distill this information from SGMA and the variety of related Groundwater Authority activities that have occurred over several years, including studies, modeling, groundwater measurements, meetings, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, and actions taken by the GA. So those of us that have followed it closely, we kind of understand what's happened and what's come out of it and the logic behind it, whether we like it or not. But if somebody's just become interested, they're going to have a pretty hard time wading through all that material to kind of get their arms around it. So what we decided was that effective communication and engagement requires that the Groundwater Authority provide concise and accurate statements of its efforts and how the stakeholders are affected. So that was kind of the thrust we put on it. It is less give specific recommendations on how that effective C&E introductory material can be provided to somebody who's newly interested and energized. So the first thing we suggested was what we called fact sheets. And Lyle provided one at our earlier meeting that we've attached to this, an example of a fact sheet. But our idea was that succinct overview fact sheets are needed to inform stakeholders and provide a basis for seeking more detail in material developed by the Groundwater Authority, such as the GSP and documents prepared by the TAC and the PAC. So we need succinct overview fact sheets. Fact sheets can also be prepared in response to questions posed by stakeholders. I'm sorry I'm reading this to you, but we did spend a lot of time wordsmithing it, and so I want to get it right. So fact sheets should be made available at all GA-sponsored public forums, other public places, and on the GA website. And the overall objectives of these fact sheets would be to explain the roles of SGMA and the Groundwater Authority in adopting and implementing the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. Summarize the overdraft problem at a glance. Summarize the Groundwater Sustainability Plan solution at a glance. Disclose the fees assessed to each stakeholder type and the rationale for the fees. And also, from an overview point of view, they should provide links to the GA and TAC documents that provide greater detail. So we think fact sheets or something equivalent would be very useful. And the fact sheet should be based on the status of the groundwater in our basin, on the mandates of SGMA, the GSP, and existing Groundwater Authority actions. That's kind of what constitutes the actions that Groundwater Authority has taken. These are the background materials. Brief fact sheets should also be provided on topics outside the purview of the Groundwater Authority, listing responsible organizations and contacts. So the idea is if a newly interested stakeholder is coming for information that even if they may want to know about, for example, the lawsuits. Well, of course, the GA has to be careful what they say, but they could certainly summarize the lawsuits and provide contacts for those lawsuits. And fact sheets should note that they may be changed over time if changes are required. So once again, we think an important thing would be summary fact sheets that will provide a new stakeholder what they would need to get involved and to learn about what's going on. And so we provided here some example fact sheets in addition to and the first one on our list is called Indian Wells Valley Groundwater, and that's the fact sheet that Lyle provided, and it's attached as addendum 2. Other high priority fact sheets, and this list could change, if fact sheets are undertaken by the GA. But I think there should be a simple fact sheet on pumping. Okay, who has pumped how much and when? Recharge. What is the accepted recharge in the basin and why? Because it made the model, because the model validates it. A simple fact sheet on importation. What are our goals and how are we going about doing it? A simple fact sheet on the allocation of recharge. The amount. This would be the current plan that the Groundwater Authority has. The list of prioritized water rights with a threshold below which people pay fees. Have a simple statement of that. It's buried somewhere in the engineering report. Have a fact sheet on fees. What is their purpose? What is their amount? And what is the rationale for the fees that each stakeholder type pays? There should be fact sheets on the communications from state regulatory agencies, such as the acceptance document we just got from DWR. There should be a fact sheet on that. And there should also be a high priority fact sheet containing Groundwater Authority contact information and links. So those are a list of what we consider to be high priority fact sheets. We have in the addendum 1, we have other examples of fact sheets that might be written. And once again, addendum 2 is the fact sheet that Lyle wrote, which is provided as an example. The fact sheets should provide information of interest to each of the stakeholder types that might go looking for information. And we've listed, we think, are the stakeholder types in list here in the document. The fact sheet should be based only on publicly available information to avoid any impact on ongoing litigation. So we came up with, we think, is a complete type of stakeholder types, kind of a person who might be trying to find information and get his arms around the activities of the GA, kind of from ground zero. And there's a list there. I can go through it if you'd like. First of all, we consider there are federal stakeholders. That would be Navy personnel and the BLM. There are stakeholders that participate in public water agencies, such as the Water District, Searles Domestic Water Company, and Inyakern CSD. So folks who get their water from a water agency could be a stakeholder type. Also, there would be stakeholders in agriculture, folks in large agriculture and small agriculture that might be interested. Industrial, that would be folks at Searles Valley Minerals. There might be an employee at Searles Valley Minerals that wants to get their arms around this, what's happening from square zero, and know how they're being treated and how other stakeholders are being treated. So, and also private domestic well owners, mutuals, co-ops, and de minimis. So we feel those are the stakeholder types who should be able to find the information they want to find as they go through these summary documents. So once again, our first recommended action were fact sheets, and I've just gone over that. Our second recommended action would be the action plan, that we used to call the POAM. And we're leaving this on there because I think it's still a moving target. We certainly believe there's been huge progress made in reporting on the finances. What are the buckets of money? Where they've been spent?
Excuse me. Renee, can you go on mute, please? Mute.
Okay, I believe she's
She
muted.
did.
Yeah, her lips are moving, but nothing's coming out, so that's good. I mean, it's appropriate. Anyway, no, never mind. So talking about the action plan, we still feel that there should be something that's kind of like a skinny poem, the feared poem. The reason we like that is if you made a much more simplified one, you could really show the linkages between tasks and how they play together and add up to having certain milestones met in time for certain critical activities. An example might be applying for a grant from the federal government. Maybe it needs to be shovel-ready. Let's start stacking together the tasks so that they add up to some products we need when we need them. And so we observed that the GA really has two categories of tasks. There's ongoing management tasks, and those are the kinds of tasks that are presented in the plan they've given us, and that is tasks that go right across the top, the full length. Each of them stand independent, and there's no interlinkage. This management task doesn't have to get to a certain point before that management task can start. So those tasks are real, and they probably tend to be funded at a level of effort. So that's the first category of tasks. But the second category is what we call project tasks with specific objectives and deadlines. So those are the items that might make something shovel-ready or might have a proposal written in time. And we have a number of those ongoing. And these project tasks are the activities that will define and implement the solution to our overdraft problem. You know, they're funded by management tasks, but this is where the rubber meets the road. And these project tasks will have dependencies between them that impact the overall schedule. Like I was saying earlier, you may have 3 tasks that have to be completed to a certain point. They define the critical path to being ready for some important event or some important milestone. And of course, manpower and other resources should be allocated to each of those task types. So that should be added to the planning that's happened, is those more specific tasks with objectives. They should be added, and the dependencies between them should be shown. The original long-bottom POA&M had that, but it was really too complicated for people to digest. It could be much simpler. I tried to see if I could find a free copy of Microsoft Project to kind of give a simple example, but it's not cheap. So the project task should be outlined, the dependencies put in there, and then you can measure progress towards those objectives, and you can compare expenditures on those to the plan, and replanning can be done as needed. So basically, you know, the plan should be capable of providing any level of detail needed, and it might be at a very high level in most cases, but you should be able to drill down if need be and find more detail. So we still think there's a need for that. We think there's been progress made. And then the third thing we came up with, I hope I'm not taking too much time here.
No, it's worthwhile.
So the third major activity we came up with that would help Cne would be an upgrade of the GA website. And if you go there, you can pretty much find, I believe, anything that the GA has done. It's there. But if a newly interested stakeholder is searching for it, he's going to be wandering into too deep in the forest, you know, for his first venture. So we decided that a couple things. The GA website should be modified so it really readily pops up in any online search that a stakeholder might do. Because there are plenty of competing sites out there with misinformation, what I consider to be misinformation. So it needs to pop up, and it needs to, right up front, provide that accurate introductory material that interested stakeholders are going to look for. Imagine you're searching for how to change the wheel bearings in an old Toyota. You know, you don't want to end up deep in the electronics section of a Toyota shop manual. You want to find a website that takes you right there. So, and the fact sheets we talked about earlier could be a big part of this website. That the fact sheet could be part of that process to provide that information. So that it should, if someone's doing a search, the GA website should pop up, and there should be a portal into it that gives that overview information that then directs them deeper into the great information that's already there. So that really completes our first item. You know, what specific activities should the Groundwater Authority undertake to increase the effectiveness of Cne? And the second major topic we took, which may have been OBE here, by what you presented, Dave, the DWR evaluation, but we concluded there was no need to review the Cne Plan right now unless the GA identifies in writing specific areas needing improvement. And we also decided it should be the GA's responsibility to be sure that the points of contact listed in the Cne Plan are current. So I guess the question is, the stuff that we outlined, would that partially answer DWR? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that pretty well constitutes what we came up with. And like once again, we took the point of view of we have to assume that responsible citizens now have been informed and they're out looking for information. And let's be sure the kind of information they need pops up readily and is available. Okay, that's my spiel, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. And I think it does help with regards to what we believe is our understanding of that DWR recommended corrective action number 1, because it relates to the elements and the key elements, and the Owens Valley Basin referred to those as essential key elements also. And I think one of the things we should do in adjusting our committee, this committee, full committee report out of this process should be aligning the languages for clarity for everybody. And I would suggest that if you read the communication or if you read the DWR assessment of and recommendations, they talk a lot about those key essential elements. And so I think that language lines up with what their request is. We'll get more clarity on that when we talk to them. But that's why we thought that we wanted to continue to draw to closure on what we thought these key elements addressed by fact sheets. I'm sorry?
Excuse me.
So the idea would be, as I was digesting all that this week and your report and reading the DWR assessment over several times and talking to members of staff, is that we could say, for example, we could suggest these fact sheets and sub-issues under putting them under the fact sheets in response, or to fully define essential key elements. And I think that would help aligning our message and having clarity with terminology that DWR uses and the GSP planning requirements for the communication engagement plan. I would ask for a little bit further, West, was there a difference in priorities between the first fact sheets and your additional topics? Did you prioritize them and make them separate for that reason, or how did you guys do that? They're broken into two different pieces.
It was mainly this thing got pretty long and detailed, and so we wanted, they say if it's longer than a page. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. This thing got pretty long and detailed, and one of the problems was to really make it. I won't call it more concise. I'll make it less long because it's not very concise. But so we tried to just kind of categorize those in two groups so we could throw some stuff into the addendum and make it a little bit easier to plow through without being buried in too long of lists. So, and in fact, the choice of what fact sheets are there might be a different list that might be more useful.
Is there a way to group it, especially in light of the approval of the GSP and the pending recommendation corrective actions, that we group? It occurred to me that you might group certain things under key essential elements of implementation of the GSP, and so you might have project summaries for wastewater treatment plant, the recycling, the interconnect, the gaps that are being worked on and addressed several times in the GSP and in the DWR approval of it, as well as, for example, a fact sheet that addresses the corrective actions and what the corrective action recommendations from DWR and what the Groundwater Authority's adjustment to that plan is. So those kinds of things, I think I liked almost all of these, the key fact sheets. Most of them are subsets or supersets of key elements overall, and they might be grouped to address. Remember, two meetings ago, he had talked about key elements and sub-elements in those keys, and that brings back the idea here of, sub-elements of the implementation plan, which we believe specifically the DWR corrective action is related to. There's other things it also is related to, and then our own assessment of what are the key things that must be addressed overall, and they can be grouped within this and not necessarily prioritized, but we're making a recommended grouping, but still fact sheets that address each of these items that you've suggested here. And I may be wandering a little bit, and lack of clarity on my part. Does that resonate with what your committee? I'm sorry, John, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, the one challenge I'm hearing with the fact sheets is the amount of information you're trying to pack in there. You can't get it into a simple sheet. Honestly, right here's the easiest method for you to put all that type of information in an app. Everyone has this, or at least the majority in the Valley has one of these phones. You can offer simple cards. They did something similar down at 29 Palms when they were doing their base expansion and everything else. They actually put together a simple app and handed out a business card. They gave a link to that app. You can also provide that information on the website, which I agree, it needs updated. But you can offer, hey, get the app. With that app, you can also start getting permission to send out communications. Hey, here's what's going on in the GA today. So you have a new way to communicate to a much broader audience.
So,
and then
but what is
on-time situation. Look at what the school district does with their communications. It's the same, similar concept. You can send out a text. You can send out an email, or at least contact them. But with their app, they can go in, oh, hey, I can jump in here and look at it.
Is the school district's an app?
It's not an app, but it's just another concept you could use to modernize this communication that can be put into a single source. The GA doesn't have to print it all the time.
But doesn't it really, in reality, it consists of many fact sheets in it?
Yeah, you can put whatever, how you can design
it's
it
a
however
method
you want.
of distributing. I don't think the committee meant this as, hard copies that be available all the time. Your recommendation was it goes on the website, it goes on, and I think the app suggestion for a focus point is perhaps relevant and one that we could even add to the Cne plan itself. That's one that was not mentioned in the original Cne plan, and I don't know what the limitations are, with regards to funding or whatever that it may take. Is the school districts an actual app?
Theirs is not an actual app. The way that they do it is, of course, they get permission, or at least get all the contact information for the parents and everything else, and then they either send out a text saying, hey, here's the newest update for what's going on today in the school district.
So that wouldn't address getting it to those folks that haven't heard yet, but it could be
It's another.
It's something they could sign up for in addition to it, and all these same fact sheets and essential key elements would be contained, available at meetings, posted on the website, and it would streamline or specifically to answer our interpretation of the Department of Water Powers. How do you reach all these different constituent groups? It provides a new method to further communicate with them and get their attention. And you could simply say, for example, on the website, if you're interested in all the details on this, get this app, or or give us, send us your email and you'll be put on the mailing list for all our key essential element fact sheets. But the idea is we do need, and I think there's a reason why there are so many fact sheet recommendations on here is because of that, how much data you're going to have to put in them and concern. But each of these fact sheets is a bite size, maybe not 1 page, maybe 2 pages, but it's a bite size look into into a particular issue. Other people's comments.
You guys forgot
Yes,
to
I
email
have a
it
comment.
to me.
This is Judy. If you recall, when we were asked to do this, we were responding to the people who showed up at one of the GSA meetings, I think it was earlier last year, that didn't know anything. They didn't even know they were talking to an organization that was not the Indian Wells Valley Water District. And so there needs to be an effort to reach those people who are so behind the curve that maybe they don't have cell phones and maybe they don't have apps. So we do need to have some printed material available at meetings for those kinds of people.
Agreed, Judy. I think that's for example, a recommendation we could make, but what we're focusing on with here is what's the method that we communicate to the GA the fact sheets out of this committee as recommended by, as modified, if so, and recommended by the committee and having trouble with words tonight. Recommended by the subcommittee and modified by the committee itself, because our desire is that we report this out at the next GA meeting in 2 weeks.
Right.
And so,
right, I think we should. I think whatever DWR comes up with is something for the future. It's not. I don't think we should delay this for that. We can always add to what we wrote or subtract.
Oh, I agree entirely. That was my setting the stage for this topic was our intent is still to have an output tonight of what we think all these key elements of essential key elements are that need to be addressed by fact sheets. We were not going to wait for the clarification from DWR. We'd take another cut at that in relation to the communication engagement plan at likely the March meeting. That's the intent. Yeah, because when I read the DWR summary and talked to the staff, I said we're not going to postpone where we've been because we're focusing on. It looks like a big key piece of that response is what are the key items that need further clarification and discussion, and what are the ones that relate to all the implementation discussions. For example, when you guys talked about what's the progress, or DWR, I said, made a specific recommendation with regards to the future progress in meeting the GSP requirements and the implementation plan. So clarification, when I mentioned a few minutes ago I'll find it. For example, the key element could be the implementation plan, and that would include, GSP summary, the wastewater, all the projects, the gaps, and the response to all the DWR recommendations, the corrective actions. So that could be grouped under that key essential element that they were specifically, we believe, were addressing in that recommendation, corrective action number 1.
So it looked like a bunch of members were also going to jump in on comments. So
yeah. And we had one from Regina. It was mailed to you from April with regards to that. You didn't receive it. Did you receive your agenda?
No.
Okay, we need to check. We need to check. Well, and I mailed it, but we need to check your afterwards. Let's check your.
I got your email with the November stuff, so my email works, but that document and the actual agenda for this evening was not sent to me.
Okay,
So you might just want to update the group.
Well, if you got that, you should have the update because you were listed on it, or we'll compare afterwards what we had for your address and straighten that out.
Yeah, the only, since I didn't get a chance to actually look at it, but based on, the comments from Wes, which was very helpful for me. Thank you. Since I don't have it in front of me. Something you guys didn't touch on, that I'm kind of curious if you guys discussed it, because you kind of made a leap of, there's a lot of misinformation, which I don't disagree with. But you made the comment of, those misinformation groups have their information so much more widespread. Well, why is that? It's actually it's a simple answer, really. There's no social media engagement, period. There's no Facebook posts. So like San Bernardino County, Kern County, Public Health, whatever. They put out the information. There's a website tag on it. You can go to it. If you don't, you move past it, scroll past. There's no Twitter feed with it. There's no Instagram posts. There's, other than YouTube meeting information, there's no YouTube stuff. There is no social media engagement whatsoever from the GA itself. And that is a huge problem with, one of the groups that I'm a member of, and, I have to correct information all the time on that group of, no, that's not correct. That is the wrong information. Here's the right information. Here's where you go to get it. Those groups get extremely popular. I think one of the groups out here has 7,000 members. Right. And not everybody is in the Valley, of course, but, when you're not engaging with everything in a very broad manner, you're going to miss a bunch of people, and misinformation is going to get spread faster through social media because there's no stopgap. So I think that needs to get added in there and get taken into account that, that needs to get addressed sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that could be addressed together with the app recommendation and the other thing we talked about earlier in this meeting, the website modifications, again, and that would specifically help address what we believe to be the DWR corrective action number 1 also.
And the only other piece is, like with fact sheets or anything, materials that are being put out there. I actually had a comment from a resident in Trona. She, of course, was very deep in the weeds, very, very deep in the weeds with this. She just moved here, didn't know what was going on, and she's going through the GA website. Everything is in very technical language, which most of us, because we've been around it for so long, we kind of understand it. But things need to get broken down in layman's terms, like as much as possible. Break it down Barney style.
That was the intent of the fact sheets.
Yeah.
If you look at the sheet that Lyle created on Indian Wells Valley groundwater, it's very basic. And it was made to be basic to reach those people who are in the weeds, as you say. And any other fact sheet that is written should be written the same way so that a person without much education could actually understand what was going on. I don't know if you heard me or not.
Okay.
I
yeah,
did.
we got you.
Thank you, Judy.
I was just going to say that was my original thought, what popped in my mind, because I attended a couple of, when we were allowed to physically attend GA board meetings, the first couple of months there were people who would get up and speak at public comment period that obviously, scarily obviously, that's bad English, that did not have a clue what was going on, what had happened, or anything. In fact, I spoke to one gentleman about the second month, I guess, before the meeting, because I'd never seen him before, kind of wanted to see what's going on. And yeah, he was here to get up and say something during the public period. And he lived here. He was a water district customer. He lived here since the 60s and had never heard of Sigma, GSP, nothing. The GA, no, never heard anything. And I'm thinking, you know, and does he read? No, he didn't take newspapers, didn't see them at all, or anything else as far as I could tell. But so this fact sheet popped in my mind that maybe that's something, you know, some basic stuff. And yes, I agree, John down there. Yeah, we're trying to cram too much in one, but you kind of have to get to the basics. So I don't know, but that was my original intent when I kind of threw one together just to see what it would look like, and what the people that don't know anything at all about what's going on with the water, give them a little bit of knowledge. But then again, we have the same problem, you know, always the same problem. You know, the old lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You know, they're not going. You can pass these things out, but people are going to have to read them. And whether, you know, they're available, you know, it's hard to say. But you know what? But it was just a thought that maybe we could make work. I don't know. I like the app thing, but there again, I agree with Judy. Not everybody's got a computer, and probably not everybody has a smartphone, or number two, know how to use it. They make phone calls maybe and send texts, but that maybe, you know, I've seen that a lot too. So
yeah, you can simplify all of it. You can do a printed format that provides an app, provides social media links, because I agree with her that that's modern communication today.
Right.
And right along with the apps, but you can get it out in every format. You can get it out in print. You can get it out in digital format, which is going to be a necessity nowadays. That's how you're going to communicate to the majority of people today.
Yeah, I agree with Regina too, and she's speaking. I've heard of all those things.
But yeah, you could put out a
but you know,
you can put
we're a bunch of old folks here. You know, well, some of us are.
You can put out a fact sheet with simple, basic information and say, if you want more information, you can go to the website, you can download this app, or you can go to the Facebook page or whatever. Yeah. Offer all of it, but you do it all in one simple source. The next thing you got to figure out, though, is if you're going to do it print format, where are you going to distribute it to get everybody involved?
Yeah.
Trust me, I've had to do the public outreach on the materials and finding every place that people go to try and broaden your horizons. You're not going to catch everyone no matter what you do, unfortunately.
There's always going to be that 10% anyhow.
But it's being able to broaden your communication methods, even if it's on the most basic format of print, by adding the additional digital, it's going to help you quite a bit.
John, I think we understand what you're saying, and nobody here is a public affairs specialist that I'm aware of. And what you're talking about is that's who does exactly what you're talking about. Gets it into the press, gets it onto the website, gets it onto the social media, gets it out on the text. As a public affairs specialist does. And, you know, maybe the message back to the GA, you know, if the board likes it, is you need somebody that's going to represent you, because it's not always what you say, it's how you say it.
Exactly.
And, you know, what I hear, you know, Wes, the idea is great. And I was reading the recommendations or the response letter from the DWR, and I was thinking, how would I explain this to a sixth grader? Because I had to read it 3 times myself, paragraph by paragraph, and I had to dumb it down, you know, into, okay, well, what are they really saying in this paragraph? You know, and if you had to write an elevator speech on the response, what would you say to somebody that doesn't really have a whole lot of attention span for what we're doing? And that's what a public affairs specialist does. So, and I hate to suggest things that cost more money, but...
Not to interrupt this discussion, but Tom, we have 2 vacant seats up here at the big person's table. Would you like, with the absence of a couple members, would you like to join us on up at the dais?
I was wondering if maybe another member would come. So
no,
I would be happy to sit next to John.
I think we're beyond that time. So please join us up here.
An advantage with digital methodology as well, it's easy to update. If you
just
need to
takes-
update print, you gotta go pull off all the old stuff, print the new, swap it all out. But you can put the newest information right then and there on a digital format, whether it's the website or social media or an app, however you go about it, but they've got to broaden that digital
And that could be made, all these recommendations could be the committee mods to this report that go in next at the GA. Are there?
I have a question. One thing that I didn't see in the subcommittee report, which I thought was well written, since you wordsmithed it, Wes, you did a good job, is who would be writing the fact sheets. That's also something that the GA is going to have to decide, especially with everybody in litigation. Some things are going to have to be approved, some language, that sort of thing. So it's not, they would probably need to have a person assigned to write the fact sheets.
And in many cases, it's probably going to be Stetson working with the manager. And of course, since there is litigation, they would have to be reviewed by the staff. I anticipate that as a normal process.
So they may just not want to have tons of fact sheets if it's
That we can recommend it anyway. You know, that
sure
we think in the way we have phrased it in the past was, and that's why the idea of the GSP implementation, before the implementation, the GSP was formally approved and the implementation recommendation came from DWR. We sort of addressed this issue at least once or twice as the key elements of the gaps that needed to be filled in, not referring to the GSP data gaps, which are also one of the things that should be added to this, but the gaps in where we think the communications needed to be clearer and simplified, and perhaps that word simplified in layman's terms needs to go back in this. It was in there earlier. I know in one of our earlier versions, at least in the discussion it was, and from my memory, the entire committee nodded in agreement that that's something we agreed to. What I'd like to do to get to closure on this is I think we've identified a few key things we'd like to add or modify in this report. Are there others, before we endorse it as the whole committee, are there others that folks would bring forward?
I would like to say something. This is Renee Westelusk.
Yes, Renee.
Okay. As far as like the changes to the communications and engagement plan, I understand the subcommittee recommends no changes, but the outreach methods needs to be updated because they don't have anything mentioned digital other than website. And it said potential use of social media. I mean, since this was written, you know, email blast lists are real popular, texting, apps, social media. I think that page 6 needs to be modified of the communications and engagement plan.
Well, and we've had two really good suggestions at this meeting. What I think, how we want to handle this and get through our two big topics tonight is we were going to focus on the fact sheets for this, for the output of this meeting. And we think that there are implied changes from the DWR corrective action that might need to take into account their corrective action and open up the Cne Plan. And we've had two specific items suggested as additional communication methods that were not in the plan, but that's not a major change to the plan. And we take that up when we get clarity from the Department of Water Resources as to what they request, what's underneath recommended corrective action number 1, and if that in fact entails the fact that we're going to open this up, then let's put these in there as well. And so I would defer that the specific report out on changes to the Cne Plan, that we shelve that until we have DWR's response and clarity, and we do that all at once. So the output of tonight is the focus areas, and the focus areas would be, you guys called it an action plan. It's really it's the schedule, and more detail on the level of things we want in that schedule to do that. And so I think that is, in trying to think before the meeting as a way through this, and having an effective output of this meeting, and then a fully informed output of the specific communication and engagement plan recommendations. We table that portion of it until we get clarity.
No.
Nope.
Okay. I hear you saying, let's submit what we have, and refrain for the moment from retasking us until we've had excellent suggestions today, because it's going to be a lot of work for Lyle and Judy to do this. Oh, I'm just kidding.
I like your delegation.
Let me observe that one night. And I'm largely responsible for this, and we started trying to put together, okay, what should the fact sheets be? It just exploded, and I have a way of exploding things. That's one of the reasons it became two shorter lists. Now I hear the potential of a huge explosion, and all of a sudden it could explode to the point of being useless. So we need to somehow find some kind of a focus in that. And another observation I'll make is that, I guess we're kind of old. You know, I could hand out a copy of this as a fact sheet to everybody in the audience today and still have the one I brought with me to take home. There's nobody out there to hand it to. So the whole idea of a paper fact sheet is kind of a generic concept. And I think it really has to be information that is available on social media, on an app, on the web page. I think we should kind of generalize the concept of a fact sheet when we think about it. But the challenge is, if this thing explodes, then and the list of topics for what we'll call fact sheets becomes just too large. Then we're just dumping a new guy right back in the forest again. Somehow it's got to be simple enough that it can lead you in. This is easy for me to say, but Lyle's going to have to do it.
Another delegation. Yeah, I agree with you, Wes, and that's why I suggested the thought of here's you focus it with an overriding element like GSP implementation, and that one pager could refer them to the elements in it that the 6 or 7 things that are in there that are referred to earlier, and that may be a way to handle it and focus it. And it isn't so much Lyle that's going to have to do it, but Stetson and the general manager, they're going to have to do it. And in that process, I would think that some of those sheets might be combined. And I think, was that some of the thinking that went into you or into the committee with regards to what addendum number 1 were second priority fact sheets?
It's just that the list of fact sheets was exploding to the point that it was too many, and so we kind of chose, okay, let's throw a bunch of in the addendum so we don't lose the reader. And so in a way, I think we've kind of outlined perhaps, and we've expanded on a process of how to get the word out, and it should be simple, and it should be easy to find, and it should pop up when someone's looking. I kind of like the idea perhaps of what was the term we used, a public
affairs
person.
Right.
And it's their job in a way to make it happen. And so because we can, Lyle can come up with a whole new list of fact sheets for us, and I'm just kidding, Lyle. But it's.
Let me see if I can.
Committee member.
Go ahead.
Judy can do it.
Committee member, I have some comments.
Yes, Judy.
I actually felt that the list we provided was too detailed at this time because we started out talking about really basic things for people who didn't understand. I think at this point we should present what we have to the GA and let them comment on it and chew on it and send it back as necessary. And that would include the second part, the Cne Plan. I think we have not had any, excuse me, we have not had any input from the GA. And we need that input. And we need it from the GA staff as well. So why don't we submit what we have written unless the other committee members object to it and see what they have to say about it?
I think that was our intent with providing all the information on the fact sheets, but not the Cne Plan, which the DWR comments need to be clarified until we take that into account. And I think the clarification, and with regards to, perhaps I'm not being clear enough on what I mean by the groupings. For example, when I said under the implementation plan, one of the DWR comments is related to the gaps in the GSP that the GSP identified and that need to be filled. I think what you have listed in your additional topics for facts are subgroups under that. For example, subsidence issues, water quality, Rose Valley region, and El Paso Basin, or El Paso region, I'm sorry. And that could simplify this. I think we're agreeing that we want to go forward with this, but we may present it in a simplified grouping, and we do want to get a product out tonight. And in part of that endeavor is we really don't have time to do the Cne Plan, and it wouldn't be effective in light of DWR's in light of DWR's pending clarity back to us. So we could take
Rose Valley. We could take Rose Valley and the El Paso Subbasin off that original list and add it at a later time. It's a detail, and we were trying to find, at least some of us were trying to find basic issues to present to the general public, like water resources.
So are you proposing that we take all of addendum items number 1 in a lower priority out of our facts list at this time?
No, not all of them. I would take out the El Paso Subbasin and Rose Valley because it's a detail. But knowing about the water shortfall, knowing about the things we have listed there that are basic should stay. And see or leave it in there and see what, I don't think you have to reorganize it. I think you can simply present it as it is, in my opinion, and let the board chew on it a while and the staff.
Well, as a committee, we've made several suggestions already to make minor changes in the document rather than submit just the subcommittees. And your comment.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
And what I was going to suggest that West and I work together on getting an input that will go into my report, and we'd send it out to all the members of the team early next week. Would go into my report for the next meeting. That's how I was going to try to handle this tonight, getting a product that we can report out at the next meeting, because I didn't want to postpone this again, but not take on the response to the GSP yet or to the GSP approval recommendations until we get clarity on them. And so,
right.
Yeah. And so you confuse me, and I think.
I don't think you need to take the list and put it into subgroups and all that you were talking about at this time.
Okay.
And my suggestion is just use the word suggested topics. The GA is going to decide which topics have higher priority or lower priority depending on what their focus is at the time. We're just providing them with a list of topics, but we want to see some fact sheets.
And that's what I call the key. Thank you, Judy. I think that's what I call the key essential elements, and it's a little bit more than suggestions. We're recommending that they produce the fact sheets. We're not suggesting. So
you're recommending a list of topics that you suggest that they should use that satisfy the key elements.
Yes.
That does not mean that the GA is going to agree that those topics are going to satisfy the key elements.
I agree with you.
So I don't know that you need to argue at this point what we consider to be the list of key essential elements, because at this point you're just recommending that we go forth with having fact sheets, having a schedule, and having the GA website upgrade, and that we're going to table the CE.
Yeah. My thought.
But, I mean, we could be here forever and talk about specific fact sheets and how they go to specific essential elements. Also, we don't have the SGMA legislation in front of us. Whenever you do that, you usually want to have the exact wording. So for the recommendation to go forward, I think you're getting way in the weeds.
Okay, but we still want to focus on, I'm trying to understand, we still want to focus on the fact sheets to support the key essential elements as we understand them. And that's kind of at the top level, and that is those first items under number 1, fact sheets, the first set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I would say under number 4, disclose the fees assessed to each stakeholder type and the rationale for the fees. We had previously used the term impacts, and the fees were a subset of that. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
No.
I remember that, and the word impacts we weren't totally comfortable with. You know, that's a pretty broad word, and really what happens is the Groundwater Authority, they're managing it with fees. That is the impact they have on stakeholders, is the fees they do or don't charge them. So finally, it was my thought, let's just use the word fees. That's what we're talking about. Impacts is, then that's, that's my life history. It's impacting me, you know. So the problem is, kind of where we're headed now is we're exploding it again.
I know. The original.
We've kind of put here kind of an overall suggestions, recommendations. The specific choice of fact sheets, they might not even be called fact sheets someday, because paper, it's certainly kind of a generic fact sheet because it's probably going to be digital. But the idea of simplified information that they can find, that the user can find with the various ways of finding it, that's the key element here. And the choice, the list of fact sheets and whatnot is just maybe an example. And I think you're suggesting of let's tie it more to specifics that are going to be coming or have come from DWR. That's good. We could just say, look, this is a suggested fact sheets. There might be a better list that derives from the guidance from DWR, and maybe that's our answer right there. Instead of you and I start, man, I'll guarantee we'll be in the weeds. This document will get 2 pages longer, and we'll be trying to find our way out of the weeds.
Could I offer some?
Right.
Could I offer some thoughts?
Absolutely, Don.
Some random thoughts, maybe. Hopefully, they make sense. But first of all, commend the committee for putting the document together. Obviously, a lot of work and good thought went into it. I think Camille had questioned who's going to put it together. That thought occurred to me too. It's obviously very labor intensive to put together a fact sheet for each of these topics, and not only put it together, but to keep it updated for some of the topics, because there'll be new information emerging over time that you have to update it. So in my mind, either somebody is going to have to draft it and it be reviewed by technical or legal people on staff, or legal and people on staff are going to have to draft it, which is a lot of staff time. So as I was looking through the topics, it occurred to me some of these are actually sections of the GSP, or they are the information is contained in staff reports. For example, the fees. There were staff reports done on those fees that went into why they were developed, how they're what they're for. I'm just wondering, talking about an app or social media, if we wouldn't have on the web page a menu with these topics and a link to the information, either in the GSP or a staff report. Now, granted, some of these, and I think mostly in the addendum, probably are not something we could. You may have to write something for that, but I'm just trying to think of a way that we could reduce the load of having to draft all these things. And I think Judy made the point, a standard format's important. It is, I guess, if you're going to hand something out, and it's nice to have something on paper that's a standard format, but if you're just looking for the information, if you can go to a link and something that already exists, it saves a lot of time and effort. That's my 2 cents worth.
It does, Don, but it perhaps doesn't address the layman's language issue and clarify it. And so we may present those as options for how they deal with that. I don't think we have to define who does it, or our recommendation that there be a new pointer to every topic on here. These are areas that we believe, for all the reasons that West has written the subcommittee's recommendations in the front, need to be focused down to these, lack of a better word, key essential elements, or essential key elements, and presented, available to the public in some manner. But we would recommend that there be a layman's version for those things that are technical. Like a technical staff report that you could reference them to. You might have a one-paragraph layman's link overview, and then pointing them to that staff report or that section of the GSP, because many of the complaints we've had in here and the GA has had in the public was that it was too technical for them to read or to understand.
A hybrid of this suggestion. You have a real simple introductory thing, and then if you want to delve into more detail, here's where to go to get that information.
Exactly.
Don, one of the community members suggested that maybe we should just list the sections of the GSP as our fact sheet areas. And I started looking at that, and then I went back and I said, no, wait a minute. If I'm a newcomer and I want to know, I've heard I have to pay fees. So I start reading the GSP, and there's really good introductory material there, by the way. I mean, it reads well. But you have to be aware that there was this engineer's report, or whatever it was called, that's where the list of prioritized water rights came out and the fees. And so that's an action of the GA. And how's a person going to find that? I mean, you and I know to go, at least we kind of know what to search on, engineer's report. So that's not in the GSP. But it occurred to me, maybe we need a real short abstract document that maybe goes right in the front of the GSP that paints the total picture. Or maybe it's a short document that's not an abstract of the GSP but stands alone, that then if a person wants to find out, okay, what are these fees all about, he doesn't have to know in the back of his mind that there was this engineer's report that was adopted, that it's all right there for him. And so maybe, it occurred to me, you write enough fact sheets, you just wrote a short introductory document.
But look at how your fees are listed on, like, your electric bill. The fee schedule to me seems to be very cut and dried. These stakeholder types are going to pay a replenishment fee and who they are. These stakeholder types are going to pay a pumping fee and who they are. As far as stakeholder types, not individual entities, of course. And that's pretty short. And then at the bottom you could say, if you wish further information, refer to whatever you want to refer to.
Yeah, exactly. The point is that to find it in, you're right, it's a very simple table, and it's buried in an engineer's report, which is probably not referenced
But
in
we
the
could
GSP.
do a fact sheet, or they could do a fact sheet that has that on there.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. That's why we put fees on our list here.
Right.
But it could be, perhaps it could become an introductory abstract of the GSP, something that's a standalone document. I don't know. See, this thing, it goes wacko on you real fast. The goals are pretty clear. We want to have simple introductory material that'll pop up if someone goes looking for it.
The main concept, I would say, is it's the KISS approach. Keep it simple.
Right.
That's the easiest thing. That's where you get most of your people's understanding.
Right.
If you want to give them the link to the more detailed information, they can go digging.
Right.
But the main message, first and foremost, is you got to get the basics out there in front of them.
Exactly. That's our goal.
Right. That was the goal.
And Dave, one thought I had as a possible communications specialist, is that something maybe RGS can take on as the general manager?
I like the idea personally of a communication specialist. I think that's, and give them, here's what we consider to be the objectives of this position. And that would be our recommendation to the GA, that here are objectives that we think are essential right now. And I think we kind of captured a large part of those objectives, not necessarily in our fact sheets, but in the goal is to provide information for someone who's looking for it and make it simple and give them links. And then all of the detail that exists in the GSP and in the engineer's report and all, that immediately, I think we're all resonating on this. The links take them to the greater detail, no matter where it may be buried in the website.
So what I was trying to do is we're actually largely in agreement. I think most people in here that we want to keep this simple. We think there are key things that they need to do better than we have done it in the past, we the GA. And we're entering the GSP implementation phase right now, so there should be focus in those key things in implementing that plan that haven't been discussed yet, and will be modified as we move forward. So do we all agree that the first 5 recommendations for fact sheets are at the top level, supplemented by, that actually number 5 down there is links and sublinks to reference material for each one of those 4 above it, and perhaps add a 5th that would summarize the GSP implementation projects, efforts, gap coverage, et cetera, that grouping that I had mentioned before. And then we can take out at this point the items listed under agenda, addendum number 1, like Rose Valley and El Paso.
I have a problem with you putting in things that deal with the implementation at this time, because you assigned us to write this months ago, and this has come up since then. So you're putting additional things in a document that we didn't discuss because we didn't have it then.
Well, the
GSP. And it seems like it would be it seems like it would be better to have that as chapter 2 if you want.
Well, my thinking
find
was
out what it is.
My thinking was the GA was authorized to begin implementation actions when they submitted the GSP. So that process has already started well before the approval. And it's one of the things that is not clearly understood by the public. And it gets to what are the future fees that might happen, which I hear questions about that all the time. And so I think to say at the top level that a key essential element of communication in the implementation of the plan is one of the number one things that we need to be doing right, we the GA need to be doing right now. And I'd say that's one of the top. I'm trying to distill this down to 4 or 5. And I was suggesting that we take those 4 there together with a specific implementation grouping subset, and that current number 5 become a recommendation under each one of those intro documents, and point to the specific documents and recommendations, references, etc. So we have a simplified cover sheet or 2 on items 1 through 4, the GSP implementation, projects, gaps, etc., and number 6 becomes a subset of a recommendation under each one of them.
Could you read out items 1 through 4 through 6, because I'm getting confused on which items you're talking about and which ones you're thinking 1 through 5.
Yeah, it's page 2 of the committee Cne Plan recommendation out of the subcommittee. Under item number 1, fact sheets. It's the indented 5 items there. Number 1 is explain the roles of Sigma and the GA in adopting and implementing the GSP. Summarize the overdraft problem at a glance. That's number 2. Number 3, summarize the GSP solution at a glance. Number 4, disclose the fees assessed to each stakeholder type and the rationale for the fees. The current number 5 is provide links to the GA and TAC documents that provide greater detail. And my thought was that there should be, in that grouping of 5 up above, are those functions which are implementation of the GSP specifically.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense, because I was looking at the other list with multiple items.
Understand,
listed.
and that's
So,
the problem with group reviewing
right.
of a document.
Which is why I asked for clarification.
Yes,
so,
thank
yes,
you.
It makes a lot more sense now.
And effectively, of course, the list you just read, David, those were a list of overall objectives of the fact sheets, and that those were not meant to be a list of fact sheets, just the overall objectives of kind of the existence of fact sheets.
Does it capture the thought of a introductory document with pointers and perhaps subsets that might require layman's explanation of those pointers?
You're suggesting another item to put on the list here, or I'm not quite sure.
No,
you want to be sure it's simple and layman's, as you want to be sure that that's made clear here.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're focusing on. I'm going down to if these were your objectives, and I understand the objectives, maybe we would focus on the high priority fact sheet list that you have below that. And I think 4 of those, or 5, let's see. Now we're down looking at the high priority fact sheets on page 2. We have listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I would suggest that to focus down at the top level, feeling the temperature of the group here, that in prioritization and simplification, number 1, the Indian Wells Valley groundwater overview, for lack of a better word, addendum, and addendum number 2 is an example, would be number 1. And
right.
And number
it's
2,
a simplified hydrology of the basin. And I think it says
that would be a subset of the simplification.
Can I make a comment? We're getting a little too far into the weeds, guys.
I'm trying to bring it up.
I understand where you're going, but you guys are getting heavily detailed into it. And the way that the document's written out, with it being a suggestion, that's the way that I interpreted when I glanced at this wonderful gentleman's piece of paper. it's listed as a suggestion. It's not saying that the GA is even going to do it. So
Thank you,
personal
Regina.
opinions, and I think Camille attempted to say kind of the same gist where I'm going is leave the document as is. If the GA reads through it, great. If they choose not to, which sometimes they don't, okay.
Well,
But at least, you have a clear, basis for, okay, this is what we're going to present. And we don't need to tell them or, detail it out of, well, these are all the fact sheets unless they ask, which they might. They might ask, well, what were all the fact sheets? And if we remove them all, well, now we don't have the list anymore of what everybody wanted. So I would leave the document as is with the minor little changes here and there about the social media stuff or the app thing or whatever. Add those small changes, but the document as a whole, from what I glanced at, looks more than appropriate. And instead of getting into the weeds to kind of chuck this out or chuck that out, keep it as is for now.
I completely agree with Regina.
I do too.
Okay, let me say something. We were trying to get to a simplification of it and actually a collapsing of it. That was one objective, and it sounds like we don't want to do that. We've already had several suggestions of things that should be modified in this document, and are there things that we could agree on? Generally, I like the document, but there's a couple things in here that are now wrong in view of the output of the DWR review, and there are a couple things that we know a lot more. This subcommittee, as Don mentioned, did exceptional work in coming up with this over a 3-month period, but it's a subcommittee of 1/3 or less of the committee as a whole, and we need to agree on it as a document. And that's happened before when we've had subcommittees together to recommend to the whole committee the output of the whole committee. And so what we could do, and I wanted to focus on again, what are the things that we disagree with as a committee in this, because previously we have had disagreement among both the members of the committee, the subcommittee, and this full committee, and that's why it was sent back to the subcommittee. For example, I think number two big number two on page 3 is a schedule, and that's the way we had approached it in previous versions of this plan, and it is the specifics that we talked about related to the draft, that first draft schedule that they provided, the GA provided to us, and I think this clarifies our recommendation. And other than changing the title of it, I agree with it, everything in here.
What I think I hear saying is that we're going to probably be tasked to redo this based on DWR's inputs.
That isn't, I wasn't being clear if that's what you took from it. I think we are, and my whole intent tonight was to get a product tonight, because I think, yes, there are additional things that we need to consider given DWR's clarification of their recommendation. But we wanted to get to the basic key, and we told them we were going to recommend, not suggest, recommend critical, essential elements for the communications, and we might not recommend any changes to the Cne Plan. That's what we have briefed them at the last 2 meetings that we were doing, and I opened this meeting by saying I think that was exactly right, given what we think is the DWR's corrective action number 1 recommendation, and then decide when we get their full clarification whether we open the Cne Plan and add as some of you suggested tonight, the additional communication methods, social media, apps, etc. But we should focus tonight on what are the key things that the PAC is recommending, and they don't have to take them, but this PAC is composed of all representatives of all of the stakeholders in the valley and what is our recommendation for what key things they should be addressing in communications in the future. And that's a living recommendation, but we've been working on it for 3 months. I'd like, together with you, I think we all would like to get to closure on it. I'm just suggesting that there are a couple things that we need to modify in it and then present it to the GA as a committee.
Well, again, I guess do we have like a subcommittee of yourself and myself that's going to do it, or?
Well, I was suggesting earlier that we might do that based on all the conversations, and we're going to review them during the next week, because I have to write the report by Friday next week, that we do that and pan it or farm it out to the committee with the right email addresses.
Oh, you're going to send me stuff.
And,
oh, no.
Well, I noticed that the one April sent out didn't have you on it. And that's...
You've had 3 of your committee members recommend that you leave it as it is.
And we can discuss that as a whole committee.
Well, I don't hear anything
We've
from
never...
anyone else.
The purpose of having the subcommittee was to recommend to the whole committee, and as I pointed out, I think there's a couple things that need to be addressed in it. But overall, it's...
But you've had 3 of your committee members.
I think what she's saying, Dave, is you have a motion before you to move forward with it.
Well, I don't know if it's a motion, but you have
that's
3 committee
close enough.
members who like it.
You've already got 3 that have said leave it as is. What's the opinion of the rest of the board?
We don't technically have a motion, but you just asked a discussion question.
I want to thank the committee. They worked very hard to come up with this and have reiterated it. And I think they've done a great job. I do have some concerns like Camille. How is the fact sheet going to be presented in an objective way? I think it's pretty easy to characterize subjectively, but just have a little concern on how the information is going to be represented.
Well, isn't that up to the GA, because they're going to write it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, I see what we're putting here as kind of an examples of candidate topics for fact sheets.
Right.
That's
that
really
was
what
the
this is meant to
intention of the
be.
subcommittee. Examples.
I guess I wouldn't. If we start rejiggering the list of fact sheets, and I think we're going to be asked to rejigger them anyway once the DWR gives us their guidance. And then, I think I heard you saying earlier, Dave, we may want to come up with a different list based on what the specifics we hear from DWR. We don't have those specifics yet. I wouldn't be against maybe making a change. We could say here on page 2 at the bottom of the paragraph right above the second list, it says right now, listed below are topics for fact sheets.
I would add suggested topics for fact sheets.
Yeah,
that's it.
Rather than recommended?
Suggested, whatever the verbiage is, basically add that one little word.
Yeah,
and that's it.
recommended is a bit stronger.
I would say suggested.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't
Not
want to be
recommended.
forceful.
I'm surprised to hear that from this board versus what they've said to the GA before.
Well, because the fact sheets are going to depend too on the topics at the time. I mean, whereas I find pumping to be very interesting and a good use of a fact sheet, it may be that the Groundwater Authority chooses to choose a different topic depending on what they feel is more important.
So now, as an example, and that was one I was going to bring up, is pumping is a very general term. What do you think that implies, and what
I don't think it matters because it is a suggested topic. If they want to get into the weeds about pumping, if they want to talk about how pumping affects groundwater, if they want to talk about how pumping might cause contamination from brackish water. All of that would be up to the GA.
So this
Pumping is a very broad topic.
agreed, and
so
so my question was, does that include past history of pumping in the valley? Is that
It could.
So I didn't understand what pumping was as an issue on this one, because to me that wasn't specific enough.
I wouldn't have put it on as pumping, but that's because I didn't come up with this list. However, as a suggested topic, it can be broad and they can narrow it.
So
They don't have to go by what we have recommended or suggested.
But what do we? I think I see what you're trying to do, but I think we wanted to be more specific in what are, from the perspective of each one of the groups that we represent, what are the key things?
But that wasn't what the initial. This was, what specific activities should the Groundwater Authority undertake to increase the effectiveness of communication and engagement?
And what we agreed to when the committee first came out of this, that one of the most important things was addressing key essential elements in that have been not clear in previous communications, and that the value of this group is to give them some clarity for what we think the top issues are.
One could argue that none of it has been clear. Even the communication from DWR, as you know, is not clear. And we're going to have another meeting, I guess, where DWR is going to provide some clarity. So that would be part of DWR's communication and engagement plan.
To me, that seems like excusing the fact that some other organizations or ourselves are not clear enough. We aren't doing our duty in what our recommendations or suggestions are with regards to the.
It's not our job to write it.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying, Judy.
So basically, what you want to say is listed below are topics for fact sheets that the PAC thinks that the Groundwater Association should address.
I would use the word recommended, but other than that, agreed.
So you want to give them a list of things that you feel that the PAC has gotten together and decided that the Groundwater Authority needs to clarify more with fact sheets.
Yeah, and
if that's the case, then I think that we probably need to have another meeting, because depending on what your stakeholder type is, you are going to have a different list of fact sheets.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the meetings you missed in this series of 3 that we've had on it, and we had a version of this same discussion about that we really needed, and when we tasked people to respond to any missing areas of communications that have been addressed for their stakeholder group in that meeting, and it was covered in my report, that this was what this group was at the first time it was reported out. That was the conclusion of the discussion we had about what some of the most important fact sheets should be, and those fact sheets should address the issue from the perspective of each of those stakeholders. And as we tasked the subcommittee to go look at that, there was actually a task given to the rest of the committee members to identify candidates from their to interface with their representative groups and identify the candidates. And I could find a reference in the report or the minutes.
Well, the question is on fact sheets. If you're looking to have a fact sheet that is going to give information to man on the street who doesn't know anything and wants to get more information, that's a little different than having a fact sheet for one of the stakeholder types that I see is not listed here, which would be a business person. So let's say you're newly arrived in the Indian Wells Valley and you want to open up a car wash business. You want to know about this new groundwater thing that you've never heard about before. So you would want general information. Are you going to look for general information that's going to impact you specifically? Are you looking for general information on what the Groundwater Authority is doing? How is this going to affect your future? All those sort of things.
And those are, you mentioned, you just hit on one of the observations I had out of the report that we lost in this, the concept of, for example, Renee represents residential customers of a public water agency. We have the public water agencies listed, but we didn't have that one. And also from the perspective of what you just said is commercial water agencies, or I'm sorry, commercial customer.
Correct.
So that's in the notes I made on the original report. We lost part of that focus on the stakeholder types for each group that we wanted to clarify. You know, if you came in to the community as a domestic well owner, what does this whole thing mean to you? And that was the impact comment, where fees were only a part of the impacts. There was also the quality, water quality issue, for example, the lowering of the basin that could impact them. That was involved in a previous discussion we had on this issue, and again, I think it was the one that you unfortunately missed. That's my concern. I don't want to kick this back to committee again, though.
You know, we went away with, okay, we're going to address each stakeholder. And so we started a list of all the stakeholders. Now we're going to make a list of each fact sheet for each stakeholder.
No. It was a fact sheets that address those issues from the perspective of an individual stakeholder.
Okay,
if
so
it was different.
He's going to want to know everything that's on this high priority fact sheet list. So do we write a pumping fact sheet for a domestic well owner? And then we're going to write one for...
No. That wasn't the idea of that.
No,
the idea of that was to have a fact sheet that I thought the idea of that was to have a fact sheet like the pumping scenario, the annual pumping reports that the cooperative the cooperative group used to put out. They used to put out an annual pumping sheet that said Indian Wells Valley Water District used X number of acre feet. Alfalfa used X number of acre feet, because they would report how much they used.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking.
That's why I asked for clarification on what the word pumping meant.
Well,
I suspected that's what you were...
I decided to keep it general. Where I was headed with my comments is if you try to... My goal, and I understood it, was let's address each stakeholder. Can you imagine, this is what, 5 pages long? I can see us now. We get somebody mediating, we get somebody in here leading. We have 4 whiteboards. Everybody's writing down everything. Now we've got 12 whiteboards of stuff. We've got 12 whiteboards of stuff written down there. And then we start voting. And remember those retreats we used to go to? And all of a sudden, this thing has run amok on us. And we've buried our key points. And so that's why you see me dragging my feet a little bit about, these are really, I would say, examples of potential fact sheets.
And that's what it should say.
And that's where...
Our key points are we need the simple information. A person that is searching can find and be led from the simple with links to more detail. And that's really the objective. And if we start going through the list of high priority fact sheets and low priority, and I got a lot of German in me still. I'll do it, man. How long do you want it to be?
No,
make your eyes water. So
my interest
we need to keep it simple.
I agree with you 100%. But you see, my objection to approving the document as is, that it doesn't capture, for example, that stakeholder piece. And I still think we're not connecting clearly on what that might be. For example, with the fees, they're different for each stakeholder. And that's where we remember the discussion about we want a stakeholder to go in and see what is their impact with regards to fees, but what is the impact on others so that they realize what's happening to all the stakeholders in the valley. And so from that standpoint, what happens to a commercial private water company user, a residential, in the case of Regina, she represents the customers of the Searles Wells.
Represent an entire town, which I was going to make a comment. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You know, I brought this up the last meeting. So when you're talking about stakeholders, here's the other thing that you're going to get into the weeds with. Okay, so all of you, all of you get a vote when it comes to GA stuff. You guys can do referendums. You can sign petitions when you don't like something. My stakeholders don't. So for my stakeholders, the ones that I represent, it's going to be a vastly different argument. Because if you put out the information, let's say, for fees, so, you know, okay, we have a replenishment fee, great. Now we're going to go into the weeds of, well, how does this truly impact the residents of Trona? Because she doesn't get a say. She can't turn around and say, I don't actually agree with this. I want to sign a petition, which we tried. It failed. All of them got thrown out because we don't physically sit on the basin because SGMA didn't address that. Legislative issue, that's a whole other ballgame. But these are things that, you know, we could go literally all night with breaking it down. And, you know, the meeting you're talking about, I wasn't on the PAC yet. Trona's had no representative until last meeting, for the first time in, almost 4 years of the PAC being a thing. So for 4 years, Trona's residents had no voice, period. We had our San Bernardino County guy, and that, you know, that's hit or miss too. But we didn't have any input with these things. So, you know, when we're putting out information, the entire purpose of like the fact sheets, any of the tweaks, which I would call them tweaks, you know, they're supposed to be layman's terms. But if you're going to get into fees, you know, that language has to be very, very careful because Trona is vastly different. It's vastly different demographic. You know, you're talking to a group of people who, quite frankly, even myself, are substantially angry at how this played out. So, you know, when you're presenting information to them, it's going to get a little bit more complicated, which is where, you know, the GA and stuff. That's why I was saying the way that it's worded now, suggested, recommended, whatever that additional verbiage is, great. But the rest of it, I don't think we really want to go into that like right now with what the stakeholders, you know, which stakeholders are going to do what, because Wes is right. We'd have a million whiteboards all the way across this room. Keeping it simple, keeping it, you know, just kind of bland language, like pumping. Well, pumping, you're right, could mean anything, but it should mean anything because it's a suggestion. We're not telling them, well, it should be this. Sorry, Judy.
I have another comment. Mm-hmm. My comment is, David, you mentioned Renee as representing a public water agency. Anybody who is a customer of the public water agency, whether it's the Indian Wells Valley Water District or Trona Domestic Water Company, can go to that company and find out all the information they want about their situation from that company, not from the GA and not from the PAC.
Whatever the GA does impacts that, and we've had that discussion.
But at
Judy.
At the same time, going to the water district to find out why you have this extra charge on your bill, which is a combination of the replenishment fee and the pumping fee, it's the responsibility of the customer to go to the water district, not to go to the GA and ask about it. because it's the water district who is charging them.
It is the GA that determines the overall fees they pay, and there are some things that are not the responsibility of the water district, except as a voting member of the GA itself. And let me respond to Regina for a moment, and then Renee, you can talk. I know you had tried to jump in. What you said is precisely why I was trying to make sure that the customers of, or the residents of Searles, of Trona, that are customers of the Searles Valley Water Company should be on this list. There are things missing from this list. And Renee, your turn.
Okay, I just want to make a clarification here on who pays these replenishment fee. Okay, the only entity that's paying it right now is the Indian Wells Valley Water District customers. Okay, all those other ones that are listed on the allocation, sustainable yield allocation sheet, including Trona Domestic, do not pay replenishment fees and extraction fees.
Some of them are not paying them and have lawsuits about it.
Well,
not Trona. I'm
talking about the sustainable. It's the 7650 allocation chart I'm talking about.
Understand, but I didn't want to get anybody.
But
watching.
I want to make sure that the Trona representative understands you are not being charged any of those fees. Your water customers are not paying for any fees.
I want to clarify that I think the extraction fee is not exempt. The Searles Domestic Water Company is on the list for not paying the replenishment fee. That does not apply to the extraction fee.
Thank you for that clarification.
Correct.
So what do we want to do with this tonight?
I wanted to follow up on one of your comments briefly, Dave. Let's look at fees for the moment. That's just on the list. It could be recharge. It could be pumping. So those are some suggested potential high priority fact sheets. On the next page, top of page 3, fact sheet should provide information of interest to each of the stakeholder types listed below. So the whole idea was a discussion of fees. Now, we didn't put the word under public water agencies. We didn't put the word customer after the water district or Searles Valley or Inyukern, but that was meant to be customers. So those customers were there, and it was our intent at least. I don't know what else it would be. So the whole idea was, here's stakeholder types, and each of these stakeholders, any of these fact sheets should provide information how any of these stakeholders is impacted and how the others are as well, because they're going to want to know how the others are.
Exactly.
So the whole idea was any fact sheet that is chosen should provide information of interest to all stakeholders. Now, I did leave one off. We did leave one off, and there's probably others that are left off too.
Okay, you and I are saying exactly the same thing, but I'm saying the more correct list of stakeholders are the representatives, especially having now included Trona residents, is the formal, it's the PAC designation, which was designed to cover all stakeholders in the valley, and they want to recognize themselves among those stakeholders. My recommendation back to the committee on this report is simply use the representative stakeholder labels from the PAC committee membership.
Okay, we could do that. I mean,
does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know. Let's see how we would do U.S. Navy or BLM. A person's going to want, any stakeholder might want to know how the BLM is being treated. So do we remove BLM from this list because it's not a person? Well, we do have a person from BLM, I guess.
Yes, and we have the Navy.
A Navy person, but well.
And I think the one addition you did make to this list, which I think was valuable in your subdivision of the names of the domestic well owners, the clarification of mutuals, co-ops, de minimis, and they're actually, there's a perhaps a designation missing even from the PAC, which is domestic well owners that they're not ag, but they have a use of water that exceeds. It's not de minimis, so they're not a de minimis user, and that was the other observation I made on that subdivision. But I think clarifying that was valuable. Now, perhaps simplifying this report, we don't need to make that clarification, and the GA can choose to do that or not.
Well, I think we need to end up giving ourselves clear guidance here. What what we're going to go with it, and we can rewrite again.
Well,
but we probably need it's a lot of work, and we have these kinds of discussions. Just take this and make it go on for 2 days, and that's what you'll be dealing with. So that's why you're kind of hearing me resisting, which isn't normally my style, but. I think that your points are well taken. I think we're going to have more guidance from the DWR, and maybe we should back off and just talk about just make the key recommendations and not try to list anything, and maybe just give Lyle's fact sheet as an example.
So I'm all for that because
I like that idea.
I like
that idea, Wes.
I want to get a key product out that's valuable to the GA on what these essential communications are at that top level out of this meeting. And we can defer the rest of it to when we get DWR's clarification of what their recommendations are that might impact the formal plan and the additional specifics. So when you say the key, what was the word you used, the key things at the top that you want to come out of this meeting, what would you propose to this committee to include tonight from the report?
It better just be drawing lines through things and maybe adding a word or two. So you want to take just a minute and wordsmith it?
Well, do you want to wordsmith it, or do you? I made the suggestion that we might eliminate number 2 entirely for the first part of this and focus on overall task number 1 or task number A. What specific activities should the Groundwater Authority undertake? And in an attempt to do just what you're talking about is get to closure on a meaningful bite of this task tonight.
Okay, I'd be tempted to say on page 2, the bottom of the last paragraph, it says listed below are topics for fact sheets. I think I would strike that, and I would say in SID, see addendum 2 for an example of a fact sheet.
Reasonable.
Just do that?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Right.
go with
I
that.
agree
So
with that.
state that again.
Okay, let's see here. We would say, and let me just try this out. This is just a suggestion.
So you're saying leave everything down to there the same?
I think probably so, yeah.
Okay.
And we might just say, so there's a sentence there that says fact sheet should note changes may occur and be updated if changes do occur. See addendum 2 for an example fact sheet.
Okay.
So I'm going to
And it is, as I pointed out, it's an example, so it doesn't matter that there's maybe statements in it that are not correct from the DWR's perspective.
Correct.
It's just an
Yeah.
example.
Right.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to strike listed below are topics for fact sheets. And now it's going to real challenge. You're going to be read my own handwriting, okay? How about we say see addendum 2.
You've already got that in there. High priority fact sheets.
We're going to strike all that list.
Oh,
Can
you're
I
starting a
make
new
one
list.
recommendation
Not going to be a list anymore.
for
This
the
is going
development of the fact
I
sheets
got it. Yeah.
John?
in a simplified language. Just put that out there.
Yeah.
Because otherwise Stetson's going to get involved, and you got engineering language, and you blew all your communication
Yeah,
effort right
we
there.
need, what he's saying is where you say the introductory paragraph, fact sheet should note the changes may occur and be updated. Fact sheet should be written in a clear and simple layman's language. Now go to your high priority fact sheets list.
So first of all, you want to add another sentence, John?
I think the very, very first sentence could actually be rejigged slightly with exactly what you just said, because it starts out as
succinct overview
succinct
fact
overview
sheets?
of fact sheets in layman's terms.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to add in
Period.
layman's
No
terms.
extra stuff. In layman's terms. That's it.
Good input.
Yeah, not legal,
Okay,
not
layman's terms.
engineering,
Okay, are
not
needed.
scientific, whatever the standard person would understand.
Okay, so I added that phrase. Now, to get back where I was, we're going to strike listed below are topics for fact sheets. Going to say instead, see addendum 2, and then I'll go ahead and just write here the title, Indian Wells Valley Groundwater, put that in there, put that in parens. See addendum 2 in parens, Indian Wells Valley Groundwater for an example fact sheet.
Okay, and
Okay.
back up. What did we do with the 6 items up above the high priority fact sheets? We took that out?
No, I think those are objectives.
Those are the objectives
Overall
of the fact
objectives
sheets.
are,
No, I'm talking about, okay.
you're talking about these up here.
No, I was talking about, you were down here already.
We're going to strike the whole list except the list's going bye-bye.
Which list?
This list down here. At the bottom.
Okay, so
The
we're,
fact sheet list.
There's no more lists of fact sheets.
okay,
Or addendum, whatever the other one is.
okay.
Oh, good point. Gotcha. See addendum 1, and I'm going to put in parentheses, Indian Wells Valley Groundwater, close parentheses, for an example fact sheet. Okay, and then I'm going to put a big X through everything, the rest of that page.
Okay, which, we're modifying the sentence that says additional topics for fact sheets are listed in addendum 1 to addendum 2.
Those topics are going bye-bye too.
Which topics?
Addendum 1.
Let's see here.
Addendum 1
So-
is dead.
Addendum 1 is being removed.
Okay, then the new numbering for it would be addendum 1, and it is that fact sheet.
Yeah. In fact, I have there's a sentence right at the bottom of page 2 that could be the sentence I just wordsmithed. It says, see attached conceptual example of a fact sheet, and then it'll change it to addendum 1.
Yes, so you're eliminating that whole list of high priority fact sheets.
Right. So everything, and I'm going to add, then we're just going to get rid of the sentence that says listed below are topics for fact sheets. Okay, so it's going to go like
Right.
this. Everybody on board with that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we got
It's
it.
all bye-bye. I know Judy wanted to do this originally, and that's why she's so supportive.
That's right.
But I'll deny I told her that.
What a struggle to get there.
So you're eliminating listed below are topics for fact sheets.
And then everything's going bye-bye and down until the last line at the bottom of that page, and that will become the last sentence of the paragraph above. Okay.
See, I think there's value in those lists of fact sheets.
Well, just bring in the moderator and get our whiteboards out. I mean, that's where we're headed.
Well, that
Well,
can
no.
be revisited
No.
after we get DWR's input.
Okay.
And we can come
see,
back to those
me, that's
lists
the most
after.
value we were providing out of the whole thing, or what are the key topics, essential key elements that we needed to address. And I think those we all agreed on, although some of us disagreed with regards to the clarifying pumping, for example. But I thought we could agree on that the simplified version could include those that you as a committee agreed to, so that we had a little bit of meat on the bones that might be valuable to the GA and our stakeholders.
I think you just had a circular argument because you shot down when we came forth with the word suggested topics, and then you and Wes went down the rabbit hole on many, many, many topics you would like to see. So
Those
either accept it as is, and we can make a motion on that, or if you want to not have any specific topics, but just the one example, we can do that also. And you can leave in a sentence that says, We have a list of suggested topics if you would like for the Groundwater Authority.
I mean, that could be put into the presentation. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the
No,
document.
what I'm struggling with is I haven't, with exception of my objection to the lack of specificity in the term pumping, is that I haven't heard anybody object to what you identified as these high priority fact sheets.
I thought that everybody actually agreed with the thing as written, except that you wanted to lump things and then you wanted to separate them and have subgroupings and...
No, that was an organizational structure issue, but no, I'm happy with those. I can be happy with those high priority
can I make
fact
a
sheets.
motion that we accept this plan from the subcommittee as written, with the exception of tabling item B, should the Cne Plan be revised?
We have a motion. Do we have
I'll
a second?
second.
Okay, discussion. The stakeholder types really needs to be adjusted. And the other
I don't
change,
think it needs to be adjusted at this time. This is a living document, if you will. You've already said so 2 hours ago, and so it can be adjusted again.
it's a simple thing to use the PAC categories there. The other item was use schedule for action plan, and I agree with, I would support the motion.
Can you call for your vote?
So you would like to change action plan to schedule,
That's what it is.
right? And I'm sure we can all agree on that. And I don't have the list of stakeholder types from the PAC in front of me, so I'm not sure exactly how that differs of the ones that we are currently.
Here's my copy of the official names of the stakeholders. Show that to Camille.
Okay.
Because it more adequately addresses the term stakeholder from the perspective that we've been talking about for 3 months. And you agree?
Since the day of the
Use the official list as the...
Yeah, since the first day of
No
that we
confusion.
were tasked with this.
Less confusion, right?
Yeah, and less confusion.
And that seems fine.
Yeah, with those two changes, I can support the
does.
motion.
Okay.
Okay, so let's be sure. So first of all, I'm going to need a fresh copy of that. So the stakeholder types, we're going to change that to this list.
Yes, and not numbers or anything else, just the category.
Right.
Large ag, small ag, business interests, residential customers of a public water agency, domestic well owner, and EKCRD or CD, wholesale industrial user, and Indian CSD, and private water customers of Trona, or what is the official name that they have for it? Because this version doesn't have the official name, but it's close enough.
I have Searles Valley Domestic Water Company.
The name of the water company is Searles Domestic Water Company.
I don't think that's how it was labeled. I think it actually does say Trona.
And
April would have to clarify that as to how exactly that was labeled, because I believe it's Trona residence.
And this particular one says Trona, although we probably would prefer Searles Valley Communities because there's more than just Trona. However, that the whole general area is known as Trona.
Correct. I think that's why it's listed that way.
Okay, so
So
we'll
it
get
can-
the official name.
However,
Yeah, I would
April
ask
has
April
it
she'd know.
listed.
Okay,
is
so
how we
that's
should do
the
it.
action, is that we'll
Correct.
get it listed as April. And if we had considered this when I wrote this today for purposes of doing rolls and votes, I asked myself, are there commercial users that are customers of Searles Water?
Yes.
So probably the terminology that April has is what That's what the GA officially uses, so that's what we should use.
I would double check with April, because I do not believe it says Cyril's Domestic Water Company.
Okay, well,
Because
I don't
I'm
think it
not
does
associated
either.
with them whatsoever.
well,
and
it would be
the town as a
customer,
whole
you'd
generally
be a
isn't.
customer of, but.
Correct.
And
Yeah, it's
we'll
a
use
funny
the
title.
We'll use the official language that the GA has chosen.
For us.
Well, for the PAC,
For the
Yeah.
PAC, yeah.
for for who,
Yeah, April has that title. I would
for
use the
who
one
she
that has.
represents. It's the stakeholders that she represents, to be specific.
Okay, so I'm going to change the stakeholder types to this list
Yes, of types,
of types. Right, no names, and they only need to be on there once. You don't need to have
exactly.
2 domestic well owners. Okay, so we're going to change the word action plan to schedule. We're going to change the list of stakeholder types. We're going to leave everything else as is.
Schedule, you got that word, and then we're going to eliminate, are we going to leave the GA website in?
Yes.
Okay, at this point, and we're going to address those other things
Yes.
that we've
After
suggested
the
tonight.
DWR thing.
Exactly, so we
We'll
eliminate
address that later.
B on down. I would agree. Do we have any
So-
more discussion?
Well, hang on. Let's be sure I get it right, first of all, because I'm going to be making the changes. So you want to eliminate Section B altogether. Should the Cne Plan be revised?
You should be asking Camille because it's her motion.
We're tabling that one, so it doesn't necessarily need to be eliminated from your document. It can just say tabled.
Yeah, well, you would table all the language after that, right?
I think we're including addendum 1 and 2 and the
Yes.
groundwater fact sheet.
So for the purposes of the agenda, that's item number B that we are
Correct. Item
We
B.
are tabling item B, but, so it's eliminated from the report.
Yes.
Which is item A. So,
Yes.
So, does that answer your question?
Well, I want to know what to draw a line through.
Item B.
So I'm going to get rid of the whole item B, and I'm not going to reference it up at the front anymore.
Correct.
Yes.
So it's going to go bye-bye under the background statement.
And addendum
Okay.
2 becomes addendum 1, right?
Well, you're going to,
No, I think I heard you say we're not changing any of that, but
We're not
The rest
changing
of it's
any of that.
remaining now.
okay.
Those are the only 3 changes: the stakeholder names, the action plan title is going to change to schedule, and item B is removed.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Those are the only
Now,
3.
so
That's
in
it.
the background statement up front, that we say, this is the last sentence in the background section on page 1.
You can say, under item B, should the CNE plan be revised, you can say this item has been tabled.
Okay. I'll just make us,
well, that's going to be in my PAC report, not necessarily the subcommittee report. Or
Well,
you,
the subcommittee.
you could report it.
The subcommittee discussed it, but it's going to be tabled.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to leave item B under the background, and I'm going to put a sentence underneath. This item has been tabled.
Sure.
Then, when we get to section B on page 4, it's going to go bye-bye. Cross it out. You with me, Dave?
Yes.
Cross out this whole thing.
And addendum 1.
Well, I thought we were going to leave all that in there, but let's.
No, that's part of item number B.
No, addendum 1 is actually part of item number A.
Yes. But just in the interest of simplicity, I thought what I did hear from the committee.
We can remove it if you'd like.
I'll take it either way. I just thought we had one recommendation from the committee to remove Rose and El Paso. It's okay. It can go in or out.
Whatever.
Just from the KISS principle, I had the sense that the group was leaning towards just keeping the priority on the high priority fact sheets up here.
That's what I thought too.
I'm sorry, Judy.
I said that's what I thought too.
Okay, so.
I agree with you.
I mean, I can go either way. I've got no problem. So we could then, what I hear people suggesting is, let's see, where is the section that references addendum? Okay, there, under high priority fact sheets, we'd leave those in, but we would scratch the sentence that says additional topics for fact sheets are listed in addendum 1.
Yes, and I thought that because when you added the change to the bottom of page 2 about see a conceptual example of a fact sheet.
Well, then I thought we undid all those changes. We're going to accept it as is, but now we're wordsmithing it. So now that we're wordsmithing it.
We're making 4, if you make this change, we're making 4 changes.
Right. Well, I just
want
I'm marching through one at a time. So.
And this is discussion.
Gotcha.
Does everybody agree?
Yeah, we're so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Discussion. Okay. So I heard someone suggest that we get rid of addendum 1, the additional topics. Is that
That's the 4th change we would be making to this.
being discussed? Yeah.
That's being discussed, that Camille would have to, it's her motion, so she would have to amend it to include these.
Yeah.
That is correct.
So it's correct that you want to see
Leave it in?
the additional list to go away?
Leave it in.
Is that the consensus?
I don't mind. There's a couple things in there that I know why they're in there, and I believe
I
they
think
are
we can
important.
leave it as it's just suggested topics.
Yes, that's what it is.
Correct. That was what I assumed that conversation ended in when the motion was made.
So are you
Was
putting the word?
addendum 1 and 2 will remain as is.
Let's leave it in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And any
Okay.
language referencing those things
It just
would
says
remain.
additional topics.
Yeah, that's all it says. And that's good.
Okay.
Do we want to put the word suggested somewhere in this thing? Like at the bottom of the paragraph just above the high priority, it says listed below are topics for fact sheets. We could say suggested.
Suggested. Yeah.
We
I
could
don't
use-
care. Suggested, recommended. Of course, we're Navy types. We
I know,
like
but
recommend.
I know, Dave, then we're
understand that.
becoming a little bit less focused than you. So maybe we leave it as is.
No. We're doing what I'd hoped we got to an hour ago, and maybe I went down a rabbit hole. I apologize.
No, I'm down with you. Anyway.
I would.
Suggested fact sheets would sound more appropriate
Okay.
in that sentence, and then leave the rest
And
of it.
that's a weakened recommended. It's not like it's.
Well, if they're labeled high priority fact sheets, it's recommended. It's wordsmithing, but it's stronger than saying suggested. These are the ones we recommend, and then later are the additional topics in addendum 1. That's just my perspective.
We can say recommend. They don't have to accept it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not like we're going to whack them over the head and say these are the
No.
topics.
And it isn't like there's
Yes.
things that we've recommended before that they haven't done. That's
Absolutely.
That's our job, is to make recommendations to them.
Then let's leave it as written.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not going to change anything on page 2 except we're going to add the word in layman's terms up right underneath the list number 1 fact sheets. We're going to add, otherwise it's not going to change, not one word. Is that what
Okay,
we're-
and
Yes.
you're capturing,
Yes.
you're avoiding the word suggested or recommended but in fact, having said high priority fact sheets,
Yeah,
that's the same thing.
yeah. Letter B.
And then on page 3, we're going to call it a schedule instead of an action plan.
Got that?
And we're going to remove B on page 4.
And leave,
And we're going to leave addendum 1 and 2 as is.
Okay,
yes.
I like that.
Any more discussion? Okay,
Got it.
All right,
Yeah.
so I would like to recommend, I would like to change my,
amend?
amend the motion to incorporate the changes that we just discussed.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Wes beating me to it over there.
Okay, Ed M. Sand,
Nay.
Dave Janis, Aye. Renee Westelusk.
I thank the committee for all their work, and I'm glad you're going to pass this document, but I don't have a copy of it, so I think I'm going to have to abstain.
Okay.
Somebody
West.
can email me a copy after the meeting.
Yes, you should have got that in an email with the agenda from April. Did you get the agenda from April?
Yeah, I got the agenda, but I didn't see it.
It was a second enclosure in that. So, I mean, your reason for abstaining is fine. We'll fix that. West Katzenstein.
Aye.
Lyle Fisher.
Aye.
Judy Decker.
Aye.
Camille Anderson.
Aye.
And Regina Troglin.
Aye.
Okay, that sums up the voting members. Motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 ayes, 1 nay, and 1 abstention. So 6, 1, and 1. Okay. With that, we're halfway through. Now, hopefully, I think there might be an easier way through this next topic, which we discussed at length at the last meeting and had a lot of passion around. Let me keep my paperwork straight here. Is the draft policy on temporary short-term use of groundwater supply review. It's review and comment, and we've now had that. This is our second meeting to look at it, but we didn't have much time to look at it the first time, and we teed this up for individual comments and discussion and closure last time. And I would refer you all to our discussion on that we had in our report or minutes from the last meeting, item number 7 on the draft policy. And there were 3 things at that time that we discussed and wanted to get to closure on at this meeting. But there wasn't complete agreement on all of those. And first was, should there be any exemptions at all, taking into consideration that the valley has a finite amount of water, the overdraft, the plan, even as it is, as DWR points it out, although it tapers it to near zero, it doesn't achieve near zero, but they expect us to adjust the plan as they move forward. In so doing, should there be any temporary use that goes either that allows use above allocation that does not either replenish, fund the replenishment of that water, i.e. have a fee, or does it reduce an allocation in a future year to that end? And the subpoint of that is that's the situation as it exists today, but any user who had an emergency use has the option to come to the GA itself and make the board and have the board adjudicate that. The way it's happening right now is that if you are a pumper and all of them are reporting except for the de minimis that aren't required, if they use in excess of an allocation and they are a pumper that's not exempted from the fee, like the water district is not exempted from the fee, the reporting, it's a self-reporting function. Hey, I'm over my function, and in the case of the water district, as a member of the board, they're going to disclose why and perhaps request an exemption for something that happens. If you're a non-exempted pumper, you don't have that option. But if you are, you have that option if they find let's say somebody has a leak and they don't know about it. They can bring that. The water district is actually going to. The Groundwater Authority is going to look into, and they're doing it now, any overage, any excessive pumping. And if they find out, they're going to engage with that pumper and find out, oh, was it, something like this, or was it a main broke and you couldn't get it closed out in Inyakern for months or whatever, that kind of thing, and have it brought to the public GA board and ask for the dispensation. There isn't a specific policy set. And then the second issue was if our recommendation is there are some temporary uses that may be appropriate to draw down the valley without replenishment fee or allocation adjustment in future year, the criteria should definitely be tighter so that it's fair to everybody. And the third issue was all stakeholder groups, it needs to be transparent if there's an adjustment overall. But again, there has to be clear, critical criteria, objective criteria, public criteria, and it has to be open to the public. The last comment that was wrapped up in number 2, I think, was if you put in a written policy, there's always going to be things that couldn't be foreseen. And in that case, they would be back to the original condition we are in now, where you could bring it to the GA because no overarching policy is seen as, foreseeing all potential outcomes, the earthquake, for example, acts of Mother Nature. And so if we decide, number one, that's on number one, is that, or this committee votes that our recommendation is that there be no uncompensated for, one way or the other, use above allocation, and they should go through the current process, that negates the other two. The other two will be a much longer discussion about what the specific criteria and objectives might address.
I'd like to throw in one comment. Oh, I'm sorry, I talked over somebody.
John?
This is Carol. I'm sorry. Can I add a little bit here before the committee starts to comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we do have this item planned for action on the February board agenda, and I think what we were just looking for is comment on the policy that you have before you, because I don't think there's an intent to significantly change what you see. It's basically just a procedure. It's a policy that sets a procedure, and every instance will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. A staff report prepared, and it'll be brought to the board for discussion at an open session. So basically, we're just asking you to take a look at the policy in terms of the procedure. Not looking for any significant changes, I guess.
Well,
if I may, Dave, there was one point where you call out that the Navy and de minimis users are exempt. We would recommend that that's changed to federal entities instead of just the Navy, because then BLM is properly included.
so you're talking about wording in the document?
Within the document
Okay.
itself. It's literally in paragraphs. It says Navy de minimis. Instead of Navy, we recommend it says federal entities.
Okay, and does everybody else, nobody objects to that if we review the policy, or if we approve the concept of the policy?
If we approve the concept of the policy,
Yeah.
yes, then that change would be.
And say that
completely
one more
fine.
time, what the exact wording would be.
Federal
John?
entities rather than Navy or BLM.
So let's come back, having thought about this for a month, or actually 2 months, given that we weren't able to have our December meeting. Do we think there should be any written policy without any objective criteria in it?
I don't think so. I think there ought to be some criteria in there.
Yeah,
that
and
tighten
I'm
some
sorry,
of that
let me
up.
rephrase that question. It's a two-parter. The first is, do we think there should be any temporary water use without compensation allowed in the valley as a policy?
No.
No.
I
No.
agree with no on that.
Does the committee as a whole agree with that? Do we have people in a disagreement with that?
I would have to ask on a temporary use factor, wildfires, you would not.
You'd still have the opportunity to go to the board to request it.
But do you have the authority to, say, charge CAL FIRE for water? Do you have that authority?
I don't know the answer to that.
Are you going to try and charge Fed Fire if we went out under the mutual aid agreement to put out a fire? Are you going to try and charge Fed Fire for using water?
We're saying.
But you asked any temporary use, emergency use for things like wildfire is on that list.
I have a question on your fire. Isn't that part of the, are they getting water from hydrants, which is already paid for?
That would be through the water district.
That's
but
right.
What about Inyokern?
Oh, that,
What if-
every fire district has their own setup for how the water
you
is
have a lot of
normally paid for.
Yeah, but not, say, the residents of Inyokern that are not near a fire hydrant. Are you going to charge one of these, say, Kern County Fire to come and put out a fire?
Doesn't Kern County Fire right now get water from a hydrant provided by the water district?
But what happens if they don't have enough water and they need to use that well owner's water? Are you going to charge the well owner, or are you going to charge Kern County?
I'm just asking for clarification on
that's why
how
I'm
the
asking,
fire works.
because that's the thing. Depending on the situation, they may not be near a hydrant or may not have sufficient water that they filled up, and they may need
That's
to
true.
use someone's well, at which point are you going to charge Kern Fire for
that's
putting
where
out
the
a fire?
domestic user would have the opportunity to say, hey, the fire department used it, come before the board in full public presence and say, hey, we're not going to charge these guys for
Now
this.
that's for residential. What if you have a wildfire in the valley?
You're going to say, does there, and I'm just asking because this is the issue, does there need to be a specific policy that tries to call out all these exceptions and may not, or should there be the current process where that issue would certainly come before the board if it happened today, for example? The alternative is, this committee could say, in principle, we don't believe there should be any, but with recognizing that we can't foresee every opportunity, there should be specific criteria set forth for what those might be, and it should be done before the full board. I'm trying to see if we have wording that we can agree to, because in principle, for example, I don't think there should be any use above allocation because it violates the general concept of the GSP and paying for any overdraft in the valley. And as a matter of fact, if the Groundwater Authority as a whole doesn't have a way to legally get that money or water back from them, then the whole valley is put in threat. And today that would be forced by doing a public request of the full GA board, and that would imply full public disclosure. Now,
I think this is a really poor policy. It is not an emergency policy like John was talking about. That would be something different. This is an open-ended thing that can lead to all kinds of abuse.
I agree.
I'm
And
totally
we had,
against it. I'm not quite done. I'm not quite done. I did not receive a copy of this policy until 3 o'clock this afternoon.
we had it
And my
before,
comments,
we had it 2 months ago before
I
the
had it
meeting.
before, and I wrote comments about it before, and I have not changed my comments at all.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
this is a poor
I think-
policy.
I think what she's
You're
referencing
welcome,
is
and I'm
that
signing off.
the draft version we're looking at tonight was not received until this afternoon, hours before the meeting.
Were there changes from the version
But
we
we were
reviewed
I
last
don't
time?
know.
This draft version would be discussed tonight, and we received it today. That's the thing.
I didn't
It's-
even
yeah.
receive it.
So,
It's the same as we had 2 months ago. I compared the whole document. It's the same exact language as what we had in November.
We
If we had
tabled
known
this
that-
matter until this month. We were going to discuss it in December, but unfortunately, things had come up. We made no changes in November to this policy.
No.
None. We tabled it so that we could further discuss and debate the topic at hand because we had a general consensus of what was going on, but we kind of wanted to hash some more stuff out and have some more time to marinate on it rather than just jumping right in and not double checking our facts. And now that we've had that time, that's what we're now discussing.
That's exactly right. But as Carol suggested, we aren't expected or requested to make specific recommendations about it. For example, what might be the criteria, but simply to make.
And why are we even discussing it?
It is, for example, what I was trying to say with my last comment was it is fully within our purview and recommendation to say that perhaps the TAC needs to consider establishing particular criteria for it. We talked about length of pumping, the types of pumping, et cetera. But we are not technical advisory committee, and so for us to make specific recommendations about what those criteria may be over the top level is not valuable.
So can I ask you a question? It does pertain to this, I swear.
Absolutely.
Can you give the committee an example of what the water district would consider a temporary short-term use that would be acceptable?
Well, that would be up to the Groundwater Authority Board, what would be acceptable.
So what would you say a
I
temporary
could tell you
short-term-
examples of what would be presented, but I can't tell you that it would be approved.
Right. So that's what I'm asking. Is something that would be presented may not be
the
approved,
two-
but something
The
that
two examples that drove this policy to be drafted were the construction of a runway out at Inukern Airport, which is a temporary use, and the establishment of the so-called man camp for supporting construction on the base. Those are temporary uses. Now, whether or not those will be approved by the board, I can't say, but those would be examples of projects or temporary uses that would be brought before the board, perhaps.
Okay, yeah, I think that's where we left off and where we got into the issue.
And we had people bring up a lot of other examples, about if X company was bringing them in, house fires. There are many examples. Perhaps a simple way is to say, overall, we're opposed to the concept, but we believe there needs to be provisions for a process, and the process is that it must go before the full board for full public disclosure, as opposed to us delineating the criteria.
I cannot imagine any use of water that shouldn't be budgeted for. I don't care if it's CAL FIRE or Fed Fire, if it's in your current airport, that should just be part of the planning process to pay for that water, and it should be part of those budgets. Otherwise, we're asking us and future generations to replenish that water if we really believe in where the GSA is taking us and the goal of sustainability. where we protect the groundwater levels and we protect the groundwater and storage. So I would think it's pretty simple. The answer is no. Whoever needs that water needs to budget it. It needs to be part of their planning as they move into the future. Bottom line.
I'm in agreement with Wes. So with regards to emergency stuff, that's a whole nother policy then. That's a completely different policy. That is a, force in nature kind of situation of, is it a fire, the earthquakes? Do we end up with a tornado? Because that can in fact happen. Hailstorm, whatever, what have you. In any number of natural disasters, because I believe fire is listed as natural disaster. So that's an emergency use policy, completely different. And that, I think we need to take kind of out of this, because that's not what this is actually asking from what I understood of it.
So let me give you the BLM's perspective, because we are a different agency than the DOD, although we are fed. When we discussed this policy last summer, when it first came out internally, it was our thought that we didn't see some of the water we get from the Navy as help. We basically help them complete their mission with Wildhorse and Burrow, and also to an extent with fire, because we have a fire station next to the corrals. But there are times when we actually go to the water district and get a water meter, and we pay, basically fees for project water. We get the water from hydrants because it's necessary to do that because of the logistics. We don't really see the need to leapfrog or not pay the fees. We will budget it. Costs go up essentially, and that's how we viewed it. Our building, we basically rent it, so we're paying for water, through the water district, and so it's accounted for, it's budgeted. What the Navy is talking about is their mission and what their Federal Reserve water right covers, which partially covers the BLM, and part of our water use is not covered, and we pay it through rent and other means. So we don't really have an issue with the policy. We don't really see a need for the BLM to have a specific exemption, although there might be times, as John and his legal staff have pointed out, that having federal entities generally covered would be probably good, but it's not our intention to leapfrog and not pay the necessary fees.
Right. So, go ahead, Renee. I see you.
I have a question. What is the quantity of water that has been used for those two projects, the IYK runway and the man camp? Do we have the quantity of water and the dollar amounts of the replenishment fee that we're losing on both those temporary uses? Because I think we need to know that. Is it huge amounts? Are we talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in replenishment fees lost?
I have no information on the Inyo Kern Airport project that was provided by Inyo Kern Community Services District, so I don't know how much water they used. I believe for the man camp in 2021, I think it was around 20 acre-feet, which was below their projected amount of around 30, I think, 33. I could be off a little bit on those numbers, but that's my recollection.
And just for clarification, Don, the contractor is paying your normal rates on that, correct?
I'm sorry?
Is the contractor paying the normal rate? Yeah, so
yes.
They're paying the fee. Okay.
Yeah, there's no exemption right now. There's no exemption. They're paying the pumping. They're being charged both for the groundwater pumping fee and the replenishment fee.
So does there need to be a policy in view of that? The two examples, because in your current CSD, are they exempt?
From paying the replenishment fee? Yeah, they're paying the pumping fee, but not the replenishment fee.
Right. So it doesn't apply. What this does, as Carol points out, or what I think I heard from Carol, is right now there is no policy to cover how they address this.
Let me retract that, because I think the purpose of the replenishment fee is to pay for water in excess of your allocation. So if the Inyo Kern Airport project, for example, takes 5 acre-feet and Inyo Kern only has 112, then in theory they would have to pay for that 5 acre-feet replenishment fee.
Yeah, and under this policy, what we've done with right now, there's no guidelines that anyone who wants to request a relief from the fee for some temporary use has, although they can come to the board. This policy this policy lists temporary use that it defines the policy for how they come to the board to request it. Is that right? And it limits it to 5 potential temporary uses at the current time.
No, it actually says may include but not be limited to the following.
I understand, but
so it's not 5.
It's 5. It's 5 that they've anticipated.
Correct.
And consistent with the comments we had last time, they can't recognize all the others, and
right.
And there has to be some way. Yeah.
Yes.
So Carol, is the value either way? This more clearly, it's an attempt to identify 5 uses that might qualify for it, as opposed to today without this written policy. There is no clarification of eligibility requirements or examples that candidate expenditure of water above allocation may be addressed. All you're doing is designing and approving a policy and a method for them to go get approval from the board.
Right, that's right. It's just really a procedure. The examples given there are just that. They're examples of potential temporary uses that might qualify for the exemption. But again, it has to be presented, and there will be a staff report prepared, and it'll go before the board.
Yep. And as Camille pointed out, it's may include these 5 uses, but not limited to that.
Exactly.
Okay. Now we've had a long discussion right before this agenda item, and there was a lot of energy in the room last time on this exact topic, which I'm not feeling from this group in the same manner that we did last time. And it seems to me we're coming down to the issue that this board brought up last time as the priority. Should there be an exemption or should there be a temporary use without compensation or not? It seems, what does the board feel? We've had a couple members, I think, say there shouldn't be.
I have been waffling on that one. What I just heard from Carol, I'd say, yeah, I suppose. But I still feel like there ought to be more criteria in it. But I guess that's not going to be done either.
Well, we can recommend that it be referred to the TAC.
You started to say something. You haven't quite finished it a couple times. And I'm not sure. I can't repeat it. That's what I was going to ask you to do.
Oh, yeah.
But
you think I got that memory?
Yeah, I don't either. So on what needs to be in it, and on how you felt about it is what. And you were hitting right on, and then you kind of drifted off, and so I've lost it.
I apologize tonight. I had a major medical event 3 weeks ago, and I'm still recovering from it. So forgive my lack of clarity in focusing my thoughts sometimes tonight and helping focus this group's activities. I think where I was going was we could recommend in principle that we don't feel that there should be any unaccounted for or uncompensated use in the valley. But we understand that there may be unforeseen needs, and we would codify that, they would be well served perhaps to at least establish basic criteria that should be met. And they proposed that by 5 examples that may apply, but there's no criteria to them. But our real objective that I synthesized from the last time was there's a lack of trust from some parts in this valley, and there should be clear criteria and clear public transparency of such a discussion, and done in the public venue before the entire public for approval by the board. And if we said that, does this policy need the temporary use examples? But because it gives a sense of presupposition of acceptance in these 5 categories.
I think it does. I think it's the very first one. Water supplied for temporary use. I threw a pretty big fit last meeting about that. And I'll throw another big fit about it. Construction is not a temporary use, period. The contractor should budget for it. They have budgets for a reason. It's their responsibility, not the users of the basin as a whole. The contractor should have to pay for it. There is no exception, period. To me, and I think to most of the board, the last discussion, I think Don Decker, he got pretty heated about it, and I remember his comment was exactly like mine. Construction in particular is a flat no. It should be paid for because there is a finite amount of water. When it is gone, it is gone. We cannot get it back. You can't magically poof, it's here. So if it's not being paid for, and it's not a force of Mother Nature that caused the usage, it should be paid for. Like that, I think that's what the consensus we had come to, and I'm sorry to put it in a very curt kind of manner, but, if it is not a force of nature that caused the event, then there is no exemption, period.
So do exempted users today, exempted users from the fee, how would they be impacted if they had construction, BLM, for example? You say, Tom, that that would be part of your business.
That's exactly it. If we do a grant project, we're going to ask for a bigger budget. If it's, using appropriated money, we're going to ask for a bigger budget or scale back the project, to fit within the budget. So yeah, it's not really an issue for us.
And I think the county is the same for like road construction. And I also want to mention that if they did have to pay more for water, maybe they wouldn't, maybe they could experiment with different ways of dust control other than just shooting water on it and waiting for it to evaporate. So that it does kind of force other outside the box thinking for conservation for certain activities.
John, what's the impact of that to your exempted use?
On the exemption, it should be no impact for us.
And the example that Don cited, the customer, the contractor in this case, is already paying the issue.
Correct.
So there wouldn't be an application for this in that instance, perhaps.
That would be up to the water district.
Well, there could be going back to try and recover that. Yes. I mean, the intent originally when this was brought up was it was prior to that camp being established, and so that's what brought up the...
I'm sorry, Don, prior to what?
Prior to the camp being built, this was given consideration. But obviously it hasn't been acted on, so in the interim, the fee's been being paid.
Okay, I see what you're
So
saying.
what I'm saying is at some point you can go back retroactively and say they paid this fee, maybe we had credit against future fees. I think we're kind of losing sight of what, I think we're losing sight of what direction Carol said. This policy as written is going to the board. I think we're trying to tear it up. That's the sense I'm getting, that we're trying to put conditions on it and things like that. I don't think that that's what they're looking for.
But
Carol, you can jump in.
I have a question regarding this. You're saying you could go retroactively and then the contractor and we'd end up refunding their replenishment fees that they've paid?
That's a possibility. If the board were to approve something like that, it would bring it to the board and let the board determine it. They may or may not approve it.
I don't know. I'm having cold feet on this. I guess since it's a private contractor and they're doing the building and all that, and the Navy is not involved with their allotment of or allocation of water being used or whatever, or going over their allocation, I don't really think. I think that this temporary short-term use should be limited to maybe emergency or something, but that there should be two separate policies.
I
think there should be one for emergency. I think there should have a temporary short-term use on just emergency uses separate from these other things. But I guess I'm feeling, I really don't want to have to refund the contractor the replenishment fee, because I don't know, it's essential for our sustainability for the groundwater plan and everything.
Carol, did you have an input?
Well, I echo what Don was saying, and also, I mean, this, even the consideration of the situations that Don mentioned that brought us to be talking about this. I mean, that's subject to the district making application. I don't know whether that is the intent or not, frankly. But again, this is just it's a procedure, really. It's a policy laying out a procedure.
Yeah, I think the question, Carol, is short in the listing of 5 uses, 5 potential cases are troubling to the group, because I think what I said earlier about we're kind of against the idea overall, and at least I'm sure what I've heard over 2 months is that this should be absolutely minimized. And if so, item number 1 is a little bit, that's wide open for interpretation, which leads to all those fears that were expressed at the last meeting. And perhaps, items number 2, items number 3, and items number 5, you could make a case for, but still have the idea of absolute minimizing this uncompensated loss of water in the valley. We look skeptically at, and I'll speak for myself, I look skeptically at item number 4 and item number 2. Item number 1.
I can expand on 4.
I'm sorry?
Number 4, the reason that's in there is the brackish study was doing an aquifer test, and if they had to pay $2,130 an acre foot for that aquifer test, the test wouldn't have taken place. And the purpose of that study was to gain knowledge for brackish water treatment within the basin. So that's the purpose of that, for studies that would benefit knowledge of increased knowledge of the basin. If you're charging them $2,130 an acre foot, they paid at that particular instance, the Groundwater Authority granted an exemption for the replenishment fee, but they were required to pay the pumping fee. So they did pay a fee, but again, $2,130 an acre foot to do an aquifer test would have made the aquifer test not feasible to even operate. So that's the purpose of that.
Okay.
Could they, in any future aquifer tests, could they plan, when they apply for funding, apply for funding to cover the groundwater cost?
Well, no, it was a grant, a limited grant that didn't incorporate replenishment fee into it at all, no.
Well, in the future, if they apply for another grant, they could presumably include that as a cost.
Again, it depends on the study and how it's being funded, but there may not be, it may be outside of a grant. It could be some other entity coming in and doing a test with limited funds. I think you're going to discourage this type of thing being done if you're charging $2,130 an acre foot. I get what you're saying, but there's value in doing some studies and getting more information. That's what we're trying to do, to fill gaps, things like that, data gaps. And to charge that money, to charge that amount for a relatively small amount of water, that's being pulled out of the basin, I think it's going to discourage.
Yeah, my comments earlier were that was my personal comment, and I would withdraw it with regards to number 4. But I think it's a sense of this group that we're a little bit uncomfortable with the semi truck that could be driven through number 1.
And I have some concern with number 5, and I don't think I communicated this well last time. If I'm supplying water to a neighbor whose well has failed, it could possibly drive me up over 2 acre feet, but I'm going to be supplying him a lot less water than he would be pumping if his well had not failed. So it will be taking less water out of the groundwater tables. If someone's well fails and they're hauling water, they're going to be hauling a lot less water than they would be pumping had their well not failed. So the instance described in number 5 is, even if it forces somebody over their 2 acre feet and they have to pay a fee, in principle, they're using less of the groundwater than if the well had not failed.
How about a co-op?
Let's see, if a co-op has being water supplied, say from a neighboring well,
yeah,
you can expect they'll be using less water than they would normally use. So I think I hear Lyle's agreeing that so this is not a circumstance. It might be a circumstance where it would force somebody into another bracket, but the usage of the groundwater will almost certainly guaranteed be less.
And if it's not, would you, if you ended up supplying 2.5 acre feet over a longer period of time, wouldn't you want to be eligible for this?
I would, but I think I'd have a pretty good argument that this was actually less water was used
than their allocation.
Yeah, less groundwater was pumped. So it really is a little bit out of bounds, I think, of the intent of this. And so maybe it doesn't belong on this list. But you might still have to go to the Groundwater Authority and say, look, dude, I went over my 2 acre feet, but my neighbor and I together used less water than we would have. So it would be a special case, but maybe potentially it's outside the bounds of this. Maybe not. I'm just going to throw that out.
Yeah, because there are situations in which you may find it not true, and you as the provider are providing them a significant amount of water above. Again, that gets down to the criteria, and it's a matter of judgment where that specific situation to arrive before the board provision, they would have to take that into consideration. And we don't know what that specific.
I think it's unlikely. I've supplied neighbors, and it goes through a garden hose that big, and you're not using this for irrigation, are you? No. And so that's the terms, and you're not going to supply very much water through a little garden hose. In fact, it might not even be a legal way to do it, but don't tell anybody.
So I have an additional piece with that. So the thing that we, we left aside was the reimbursement program for when your well fails. wouldn't that be something to then include in that cost, that my neighbor had to pay X amount of the fee while we were trying to get this sorted and fixed and all that stuff, rather than having it in here? Because it just doesn't fit. Like, it is kind of an oddity. It seems like this piece, number 5, would be more appropriate to put on the if your well fails policy rather than this policy. Because the only time that, now if your well failed because you didn't do the maintenance, or you didn't replace the pump when you got told to, or you knew it was going out, now that's a completely different issue, which is addressed in that other policy. So, and, your neighbor could then come after you for that fee to get reimbursed, and now you don't, you're not friendly with your neighbor no more. That, I agree with you that I don't think number 5 really needs to be in this one. I don't think it applies here.
I have a question regarding number 1. Would that apply to commercial temporary use? Because I remember back, I believe in 2018, there were some people complaining to the GA that the water district had allowed the PG&E gas company to pump a bunch of water, or I guess maybe they took water trucks, but anyway, they needed it for, I believe, some kind of maintenance or repair on a gas line near Highway 395 or something. And people were upset that, that the water was just being allowed to be used. But I don't know the circumstances. Maybe Don Zadiba, do you know, did the PG&E pay for that water that they used?
Well, they paid for the water, but at that time, if I'm remembering when it was pre the replenishment fee, so they were paying based on construction meter charges to the water district. And the water was being used, you'll recall the gas explosion in San Bruno, and the PG&E had an extensive program going around testing their gas lines, and that's what that was used for. So I think I would encourage people to support use for water in a purpose like that. I mean, I think you want your assurance that your gas line has integrity. It's not going to explode on you. So that's what they were doing. I think the water was used for a good purpose, and they paid based on construction meter rates at that time.
Okay, so the water district wasn't losing any money then?
No.
But would they be exempt could they be exempt from the replenishment fee in that case if it happened today?
If the water district decided that they wanted to make an application to the Groundwater Authority and the Groundwater Authority approved it, then yes. If we decide not to and the Groundwater Authority, or we decide to apply and the Groundwater Authority does not approve it, then no. But that's the whole purpose of having a policy or a procedure, a way that you can perhaps get some relief. If in the opinion of the Groundwater Authority staff and they make a recommendation to the board and the board accepts that recommendation, then there's relief for paying that fee.
But would the fee be that much? Because I'm sure they didn't use several acre feet or whatever.
I don't recall how much they used, but it's individual cases. Like I said, the camp that's currently over there, my recollection for this year is around 20 acre feet, but they were projected to use somewhere around 30, 32 a year, something like that. So it's not fully staffed, I understand. That's probably why they were under their projected use.
And then I just have another thing I wanted to say about number 5. Why is it only limited to de minimis pumpers? What about the small private wells that do go above de minimis usage? If they helped out another well owner, a de minimis or non-de minimis well owner, why it seems unfair that you have to be a de minimis, because the non-de minimis private well owner is going to have to pay a lot more to help out that distressed well owner, whoever they may be. I don't know. I have a problem with it pertaining only to de minimis if it's going to be included.
The wording states that, but again, in the beginning it says not limited to the following, and it's at the policy can be changed at the discretion. The policy is subject to change at the discretion of the board.
Right. These are
So
only
again,
examples.
It's written
it's
to
not a
allow
comprehensive
flexibility because we can't anticipate every situation that's going to arise.
Ed, did you have a comment? Ed Imsand?
Oh, sorry. Do I have a comment? Yeah, I think there should be some kind of limit as to what constitutes emergency versus, temporary use. I mean, and what is temporary? Is that a year? Is that a month? And, I think an easy way out is to any emergency that they feel is justified, go before the board and get a waiver. But anything else, construction, so forth, pay the fee.
Other thoughts? Let me try to sum up what I think we're saying as a committee. This policy codifies a process, as Carol points out, provides a process, and Dawn provides a process and a procedure by which people might apply for their individual exemption from fees in a situation, a temporary emergency or other situation. This committee seems to agree that in principle there should be no uncompensated for use of water in the valley beyond the allocation. And the second part of that would be if we recognize there are situations we can't think about, and some of these may be close to that, others we don't agree on, but if this policy is established, there should be the intent of the GA. Our recommendation to them is that it be absolutely minimized, and in that spirit, and minimized with an attempt to provide some criteria, a time limit, etc. But in that, we see number one as, I'll take a step back. We see the example uses listed as implying a portion of pre-approval by the board and encouraging application. And as such, we think number one is way too open. I think number two, from what I've heard, number three, I myself personally think number four and number five are candidates, but again should be minimized. Is that something the committee as a whole, that position, we would entertain?
I would. I agree with what you said.
Would anybody? Okay, I'll make a motion to that effect. That be our comments back to the Groundwater Authority about this policy.
I would second that. Just write down what you just said.
Yeah, don't forget.
Yeah, you've got it. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, in principle, there should be no uncompensated deletion of water in the valley, but recognizing that all situations can't be predicted, there needs to be a policy for how you would apply, and it should have minimized, and the intent should be to greatly minimize any water taken out of the valley overall. And then,
if you think about it, those ones that you listed, if you look at those four, So take out number 1. If you took out number 1, it's no longer a short-term use policy. It's an emergency use policy. It's based on emergent need. A leak is technically an emergency. A fire is an emergency. An earthquake is an emergency. Your neighbor's well going out, again, though, that should probably be in the other one, not this one. That's an emergency. These are emergency uses, not short-term uses. Short-term uses would, to me, as a layperson, would mean things like construction, which is the giant truck driving through number 1 making everybody upset.
Well, it's not just that.
There's some others, but
it's way too open. It doesn't, number 1, and the way I was trying to think how I would phrase this is consistent with this committee's mindset about absolutely minimizing this to where it's really needed would be that number 1 doesn't have the intent to minimize it. It's too wide open. And we would prefer to see, even among the others, some definition of time limit, because the others all use the word temporary, and objective criteria that they should apply for. And so that would be my motion, is that we accept number 2 through 5. We talk about in general, in principle, not to have any, but we recognize the need, but it should be minimized. And then they should make the criteria for objective criteria about times, et cetera, set a baseline for that. So that would be the only thing we would add to this policy, having subtracted our recommendation to subtract number 1.
I just have a question. How is number 4 an emergency? Because that's a project where you're doing analysis.
It is, but as Don pointed out, it could be a project where the benefit to the valley is several times the amount of water extracted. An example would be, some of the projects you mentioned.
The brackish water project. And in fact, that wasn't even potable water that was pumped. It was brackish water.
Yeah.
So
But
to
I
pay a
just have a
fee on
question.
that was...
How much water was actually pumped?
I think it was somewhere between 10 and 12 acre feet. I'd have to go back and look, Renee. I don't recall.
We can't.
It wasn't
write,
a lot of water, but there wasn't any provision for paying for it out of the grant.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion. John? Tom?
No issue.
Camille?
No issue.
West?
Fine.
Yeah, I'm good.
Don?
Further discussion? No.
Renee? Any further discussion?
I just want to clarify. So the motion you're talking about is you're telling them basically that they need to revise number 1 or eliminate it and just go with 2 through 5?
Yeah, and we're expressing the extreme concern with any allowable overdraft, and therefore it should be minimized under this policy. But we're setting a policy by which somebody could apply.
Okay, because I guess that I would agree if you can add something, whatever you summarize to the GA board about the timeline again and the quantities of water being temporarily used, that needs to be specified, and like how many times is this going to happen in 1 year, etc. I don't know, things like that could.
Yeah, that's the objective criteria part of it, to include the timeline for definition of temporary. But it's not going to be an absolute. It's just a general policy. So Ed, did you have other comments?
Nope.
How about Judy?
I believe Judy left.
Okay. Do we have any open comment from the public on this issue before we vote? Okay. With regards to that, let me get my paper and we'll vote. Ed M. Sand.
Yay.
David Janis, aye. Renee Westerlusk.
Aye.
Wes Katzenstein.
Aye.
Lyle Fisher.
Aye.
Judy Decker, not here. Camille Anderson. I'm sorry.
Aye.
Thank you. Regina Troglin.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we've that item passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 and 0 among those present. Okay, now it's time for item number 7, open member comments. And I'll start online with Ed.
No comment.
Renee?
I don't really have any comment. I thank the committee that did the work on the recommendations on the communications for the GA.
Okay, John?
No comment.
No comments from beyond.
No comment.
No comment.
Nothing further from me.
The only thing I have is a piece of housekeeping. If we can make sure that we're sending things out more, preferably 48 hours before, but at minimum 24 hours, especially to our, federal counterparts and whatnot that are participating, including myself.
Don?
Nothing.
Okay, my closing comment would be, again, thank you to the committee. I realize this was a relatively thankless task, and you guys dealt with it for a total of 4 months, and your good inputs, and even as we saw in this committee, we can go around and around on things and down rabbit holes because it's very complex but very important. I mean, notice the DWR mentioned they're going to be watching the communication and engagement plan. And I know the board was very interested, having received that comment among others, that the Policy Advisory Committee engage on this. That's one of the reasons we pushed to get some key things identified today and then refine the rest of it later. The second thing I would like to do is recognize you all for your dedication tonight in continuing to engage when it may have been very difficult and time-consuming, and thanks for bearing with me on this. And with that, the next item is next meeting date, and it is February 24th. That's our standing meeting on the fourth Thursday. And with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you, folks.